DJ referred to him as his brother, even though they're not actually related.
They grew up together in West Hartford, went to Hall High School.
You find one, you find the other. I observed a tan Honda Accord parked, the doors open.
You could see blood where their victims were in the front seats when they were shot.
He never saw the shooter. He claims that he didn't know who shot them.
Alarm bells are going off in their head. This might be a retaliation.
There was one young man who really had this expectation of himself to do what was right and avenge the death of his good friend.
That's when everything went wrong.
It's just a few days before Christmas in the capital city of Hartford, Connecticut.
It's a historic city. It's a city that used to be the richest in the U.S. There is a lot of diversity here. It's rich with culture, the arts.
Hartford is a super diverse community. You have many Latinos, Puerto Ricans, South American, Central American. You have Bosnians. You have a large Albanian community. It's just African American, Asians, Laotians, you name it, we have it in Hartford.
Saturday, December 20th, 2014. Around 5:30 in the morning, a resident of the apartment building near Colt Park is startled by a loud noise.
She sees a man. He's clutching his arm. The person is bleeding profusely. He's obviously in a lot of pain. He gets inside that building and he collapses on the stairwell.
She let him use her cell phone to call 911.
She stays with the man until EMTs and officers with the Hartford Police Department arrive.
That's where he started getting medical treatment by EMS.
He is shot in the shoulder and through the elbow.
Did they know the shooter? He did not want to say who shot him. He did not want to say anything.
Responding officers learned the man's name.
Dedrick Jimenez. DJ is his nickname.
24-year-old DJ says he was shot not far from the apartment building.
He was in his brother's car when he was shot.
DJ reveals that his brother, 23-year-old Hiram Martinez, is still in the car, and he was also shot.
His brother's car is down the street. You can almost see where the vehicle was from where he was.
Investigators find a man slumped over the center console. They can see pretty quickly he's been shot at the back of the head.
Despite the wound, Hiram still has a pulse.
He is transported to the hospital. They're still working on him.
DJ Jimenez and Hiram Martinez weren't born brothers, but came to think of each other as such by way of an intense friendship that began when they were young.
They grew up together in West Hartford, went to Hall High School. People think, well, Hartford, West Hartford, same thing, but very, very different. West Hartford has a smaller town yet urban feel to it.
DJ referred to him as his brother. He called Hiram his brother, even though they're not actually related. They were just close friends.
They had a fast friendship and an enduring one. They went through a lot of life together, from their boyhood to their teen years to their adult years.
As a teen, Hiram dreamed of becoming a race car mechanic. But that dream didn't pan out. When he was 20, Hiram and his girlfriend became parents to a baby girl. On December 20th, 2014, both Hiram and DJ are on their way to Hartford Hospital after suffering gunshot wounds during an early morning attack. As the men receive medical care, detectives arrive at the apartment building near the 100-acre Colt Park.
It's an area that's usually full of happy times and families and sporting events. But on this occasion, on this day, police tape is surrounding the scene.
I was asked to respond to the crime scene and assume the role as the lead investigator.
Along with Detective Richter, siblings Anthony and Mike Rakowski are also on the case.
My brother is my twin, so to be able to work with him on such, high responsibility cases is it's really an amazing thing. He brings a certain view to the table, a little bit different than mine sometimes, and we bounce back and forth off each other, and it makes for a much more well-rounded investigation.
Detectives begin their investigation in the stairwell where DJ took refuge.
We're trying to get as much information as possible as quickly as we can. So just went over there, saw what was there, which is a little blood and, some EMS equipment that they used to treat him, and then just backtracked. So I just started walking from there back towards the vehicle.
They examine the car, where the second victim, Hiram, was found.
I observed the doors open, 2 doors open.
You could see blood. You could see kind of where the victims were in the front seats when they were shot.
Hiram Martinez had been seated in the front passenger seat, and DJ was the operator of the vehicle.
That leads investigators to an important conclusion about where the shots came from.
So Hiram shot in the back of the head, and then Dedrick is shot in the shoulder and through the elbow. And if you imagine a Honda Accord, with a center console and the driver sitting in the driver position, that's consistent with being shot in the back seat. The shooter's in the back seat.
It appears likely to investigators that DJ and Hiram knew the person who shot them.
We didn't really find any shell casings outside the car. I think we maybe found a cigarette butt outside the car. We don't know if that was connected.
Investigators will have to wait for a warrant to conduct a detailed search of the vehicle. With the crime scene giving up few clues, detectives head to Hartford Hospital to speak with the victims.
They have to start figuring out why. What's the motive? Why did someone want to hurt or potentially kill both of these men? They go to the hospital. That's where DJ has had successful surgery on his shoulder and elbow. He's got permanent rods put in both.
Detectives learn that the man DJ called his brother is not so lucky.
Hiram Martinez, he died later at the hospital. We had a homicide.
Detectives speak with DJ, who is still claiming to know nothing about the attack.
We're trying to get as much information as possible as quickly as we can. He gave us bits and pieces.
The initial information he provided was, I don't want to say misleading, but it was not complete. He initially provides information that he never saw the shooter. He claims that he didn't know who shot them, that he was in a vehicle. He took off running.
Witnesses don't want to be witnesses. People are scared. They don't want to be the one that snitches.
No one wants to be, considered a snitch.
Investigators share with DJ that his beloved brother and best friend, Hiram, has died.
When he finds out that Hiram Martinez, his childhood best friend, is dead, that's when everything changed.
He started giving information about who the person was.
Now that DJ is willing to talk, investigators are all ears. And it turns out DJ has a lot to say.
The individual who shot them goes by the street name Bill Paul.
In Hartford, Connecticut, police are investigating an early morning double shooting just days before Christmas in 2014. 24-year-old DJ Jimenez survived wounds to the shoulder and arm. His best friend, 23-year-old Hiram Martinez, was not as fortunate.
He's been shot at the back of the head, and he is pronounced dead.
After learning of his best friend's death, DJ cooperates with detectives. He says he knows who fired the shots.
That was when DJ provided the information that an individual he knows as Papone was the person who shot him.
It was someone he met during a stint in prison. Both were on parole.
DJ tells detectives he and Hiram ran into Papone the night before.
DJ says that he was out with his bro. They were hanging, having some drinks, going to some clubs.
And he had explained that they had all been at an after-hours party off of Park Street in Hartford. And he and Hiram had had contact with Papone at that party.
So there's DJ, Papone, and Hiram all hanging out. They're having drinks. It's a good time. It's really late at night, early in the morning, and it seems all good. At one point, DJ has to use the restroom, and that's when Hiram and Papone have time together themselves.
DJ tells detectives that when he came back, Papone's mood was starkly different.
His whole disposition changed. He wasn't talkative anymore. He knew something was wrong or something was off with this guy.
Everything seemed to be fine, but now something has changed drastically. He explains to investigators something wasn't right. He didn't know what at the time.
According to DJ, Hiram pulled him aside a few moments later. He claimed that Papone became upset when Hiram started talking about another crime, one that took place about a week prior.
Hiram had actually somewhat bragged at the fact that he had killed Mariano Gonzalez on Bond Street to Papone.
Investigators interviewing DJ immediately recognized the crime DJ is referring to.
When they're hearing DJ say this, now alarm bells are going off in their head. We might have a payback. This might be a retaliation.
My brother was assigned as the lead investigator in that case. I was called in to assist.
December 14th, 2014, we had patrol officers dispatched to the area. It was about almost 2 a.m. On the report of shots fired and then another call of a person shot. Officers went out to the scene. At that time, they located a victim with a gunshot wound to the head. He was pronounced deceased on scene.
The victim was 37-year-old Mariano Gonzalez.
This crime scene was fairly limited in size in the sense that it was contained to really the driveway and the street immediately in front of there. There wasn't too much for evidence at that scene other than the deceased himself. Once the initial photographs are done, and then we can kind of roll the deceased over to get a better look at him, we discovered that he had a cell phone in his pocket and he had ammunition, rifle caliber ammunition.
When investigators questioned onlookers at the scene, they learned that one woman witnessed the actual shooting.
She heard an argument outside. She heard some foul language, caused her to look out the window, and she sees the suspect shoot our victim one time. The victim falls. She sees him shoot a second time. After he shot a second time, the suspect goes through, by her account, goes through the victim's pockets. She believed he took a watch off of his wrist. As the suspect stood up, he then kicked the victim in the face and then ran away. She described him as thin, right, very thin. He was shorter than the victim.
When detectives broke the news of Mariano's death to his family, they hoped they might also uncover a lead.
It's a huge priority for us to open up that line of communication with family and implore them to actually give us information.
But instead, Mariano's brother flew into a rage.
The brother was very aggressive, like very, very aggressive. I understand he's grieving, people process that differently. So we kind of let him be. The brother shut the door on us, like, we're done, we're not talking to you. So we didn't really get anywhere as far as establishing a timeline there or any cooperation with family.
The major challenge initially was the victim's family's lack of cooperation.
They didn't want anything to do with it, I guess because of the fear of retaliation. And you find that a lot. A lot of people don't want to get involved.
Eventually, investigators did gain access to Mariano's cell phone.
We were able to take one of the last phone numbers that had made contact with the victim and link that to Hiram Martinez. The contact, if I recall, was about 30 minutes prior to the calls for the shots fired.
Hiram also matched the description of the shooter given by the woman who witnessed the crime.
And now we have eyewitnesses giving us a description of a person consistent with Hiram Martinez. It's really starting to point towards Hiram Martinez. We're still far away from calling him a suspect. He's just someone that we want to talk to.
But before detectives could question Hiram, he too was gunned down. Back at Hartford Hospital, Hiram's best friend, DJ, tells investigators that Hiram bragged about shooting Mariano to the man who eventually shot both him and Hiram.
According to DJ, Hiram told Pepone that he killed Mariano.
We immediately suspected that there was a connection to the original Bond Street case.
Police in Hartford, Connecticut are investigating the shooting death of 23-year-old Hiram Martinez. They believe his death could be related to a shooting that claimed the life of Mariano Gonzalez just 6 days before. A killing that Hiram was suspected of carrying out.
Although we suspected that, we don't fixate on that, because it's very easy to fixate on an avenue like that and then you overlook a second potential suspect. We've seen commonly that people have multiple adversaries and multiple avenues of people that want to harm them. So, though we believed it wholeheartedly, we had to remain open-minded.
So far, the only person investigators can count on for information is the sole surviving victim of the second shooting, DJ Jimenez. As DJ recovers in a local hospital, detectives continue to press him for details.
He told us bits and pieces through multiple interviews. We met with Mr. Jimenez several times, different detectives, myself, to try to piece together what occurred. This happened over a course of a few interviews.
Over time, DJ expands on what happened when Pepone's mood had changed that night at the club, after Hiram had bragged about shooting Mariano.
It's getting late, and clearly the fun is starting to feel like it's over. Pepone's not in a good mood.
They were leaving, and Pepone had asked them to give him a ride to his girlfriend's house.
They didn't want to give him a ride. Eventually, reluctantly, I guess they did give him a ride.
DJ explains he was driving with Pepone in the back and Hiram in the passenger seat. Pepone said he needed some cigarettes. They stopped at a convenience store.
Pepone wants Martinez to get the cigarettes. Martinez doesn't want to get the cigarettes. The bantering and the arguing is going on. Finally, DJ says, I'll get the cigarettes. He goes into the convenience store. He comes out with the cigarettes. Now, supposedly, they're on their way.
Then, Pepone requested another stop. This time so he could relieve himself. He tells DJ to pull over near Cold Park.
They pull up next to a grassy knoll on the outside of the park, and Pepone gets out. DJ tells investigators that he can see Pepone, and Pepone is not so far away, but he's on his cell phone. And he watches him on his cell phone, probably doesn't think too much of it, waits for him to get back to the car.
Shortly thereafter, he gets back in the vehicle, and that's when Jimenez hears a loud bang. covers his ears. He realizes it's a gunshot. Gets out of the car, starts running.
For investigators, it raises concern that the cycle of retaliation might continue. But that leaves them with a burning question. Who is Papone?
Street names are street names. They can be used by anybody.
Detectives know they need to ID Papone quickly, before the bloodshed continues.
We don't want to see retaliatory violence. Anytime we have a crime of violence like this, we are very concerned about retaliation. A lot of times we see family members or close friends of victims, if they hear a name, whether it's true or not, they want to go retaliate.
Investigators aren't the only ones who are worried.
This was a crime 5 days before Christmas. The crime on Bond Street was just a week prior. This was something that really rocked the Hartford community. This was yet another homicide in a city reeling from way more than their fair share. This was something that people who lived in the area were stunned by. They were startled, they were shaken, they were scared.
Detectives hunker down, focused on finding Papone's true identity.
We will take those street names and we'll enter them into certain databases that we have, or we ask, DOC contacts, probation contacts, anybody who's familiar with somebody utilizing that street name.
We just had his nickname, and we were able to identify who he was through, our channels with the Department of Correction, because he uses that nickname, Papone, before.
We were able to take the street name information obtained from DJ. We were able to determine that Papone was, in fact, Tyrone Rosa.
To make sure they have the right guy, investigators show DJ a photo lineup.
We created a photo array. In that array, it contains our potential suspect as well as individuals who look similar.
It didn't take any time at all for DJ to say, that's him.
He did make a positive ID of Tyrone Rosa as being the person that was in the car.
In Hartford, Connecticut, detectives believe they're getting closer to finding the killer of Hiram Martinez, after Hiram's best friend, DJ, identifies Tyrone Rosa as the gunman.
After we identified Papone, or Tyrone Rosa, we just started doing a workup, a background on him, to figure out where he lives, all this pertinent information.
Before they attempt to bring him in for questioning, detectives do some digging on Tyrone. They learn he was close with the murder victim, Mariano Gonzalez, and his brother, the man who'd flown into a rage in front of police upon learning of Mariano's death.
He knew Mariano, but the relationship that Papone had with his brother was far deeper than investigators first realized. They found out later, via social media, that this was someone that Papone cared deeply about. He said he loved him, he would die for him.
But investigators speculate that Hiram had no idea the man he was socializing with at the club was so close to a man he claimed to have killed.
Tyrone and Mariano Gonzalez's brother and Mariano Gonzalez were actually friends. We don't believe that Hiram knew that when he was bragging about that homicide.
Tyrone may have wanted to retaliate because Hiram Martinez admitted to killing the brother of one of his closest friends.
Investigators also learned that the 35-year-old Tyrone Rosa is no stranger to the law.
He was on parole, which is great for us, because that gives us access for an interview. And that's what we did. We ended up having his parole officer bring him up to the Major Crimes Division for an interview.
17 days after Hiram and DJ were shot, Tyrone Rosa is brought in for questioning with detectives, grudgingly.
He didn't seem nervous, per se. He definitely seemed very closed off and reluctant to speak. He was keeping his cards close to his chest.
Detectives keep at it.
We started getting to the meat of it, asking him like, if he knew certain people, if he was at an after-hours club with them. He, seemed reluctant to speak, but then he started giving us some information, saying he was at an after-hours club with Mr. Martinez and Mr. Jimenez.
At this point, the story is starting to line up a little bit with DJ's, but this is where the story changes.
Tyrone claims he didn't leave the club with DJ and Hiram.
They said he never went with them in the vehicle, that he stayed at the after-hours club, and they left by themselves. When I knew he was lying, that's a good sign, actually, for me. I like when people lie in an interview. You know you're getting close.
As for the victim of the first shooting, Mariano Gonzalez, Tyrone says he had no reason to avenge that death.
He said that he doesn't really know the other victim, which was Mr. Gonzalez, and his brother, kind of downplayed. He said he knew of them, didn't really associate with them. He kept trying to downplay his association with the victim.
Investigators aren't buying it.
He didn't really want to admit that he was really close friends with him. We knew he was close friends with his brother. That's our belief of why this occurred.
Speculation isn't enough to bring murder charges, but investigators do find a way to keep Tyrone behind bars.
Because Mr. Rosa was on parole at the time, and he was a suspect in a homicide, his parole was violated, so he's remanded to custody.
Investigators keep close tabs on Tyrone. The day after his arrest, he makes a phone call from jail to Mariano's brother.
We already said he wasn't close to him, so why are you calling this guy if you don't really associate with him? So that, obviously, we knew he was lying.
That's not all. He asks Mariano's brother for a favor.
He also started telling this guy to destroy his phone, which is like, if you have no involvement, why are you telling someone to destroy their phones?
In late December 2014, police in Hartford, Connecticut are holding Tyrone Rosa in connection with the shooting death of 23-year-old Hiram Martinez. Detectives believe that Tyrone killed Hiram in retaliation for the death of his friend, Mariano Gonzalez.
He denied shooting Mr. Jimenez or Mr. Martinez. He said, I never went with them to the car.
But the day after Tyrone is taken into custody, he makes a jailhouse phone call to Mariano's brother, requesting that he tell a man named CL to destroy his phone. Investigators want to know why. They track down CL.
He was on probation for a gun arrest, so we interviewed him at his probation office.
CL admits he was with Tyrone that night.
He's friends with Tyrone Rosa, and he was with Mr. Rosa at the After Hours Club prior to the incident.
Eventually, Tyrone left the club.
He just went, didn't know where he went. Mr. Rosa didn't tell him.
Then, around 5:30 a.m., minutes after the shooting would have taken place, CL called Tyrone to ask him where he had gone. Tyrone didn't say, but asked CL to pick him up at a location near Colt Park.
He went and picked him up near the crime scene. I don't even think he knew what Mr. Rosa did, because I asked him all that, and he just picked him up and was doing him a favor.
CL's statement appears to contradict what Tyrone told detectives.
Mr. Rosa denied, obviously, being in that car, so if you weren't in that car, you're not being picked up by the crime scene. We found the guy who picked him up by the crime scene.
In order to charge Tyrone with murder, investigators need more. They need evidence. They hope the vehicle in which Hiram and DJ were shot might give them just that.
We obtain a search warrant to process that car. The crime scene division will process it, and they'll look for all different kinds of physical evidence: DNA, fingerprints, shell casings, firearms, anything that's in there that we ask them to look for. They found a fingerprint on the inside rear door handle, which it's actually pretty rare to get a usable fingerprint. But they did recover a fingerprint, and that print later did hit to Tyrone Rosa.
Now they know what he told them about not being anywhere near the crime scene, not still being in the car, was not true. They placed Tyrone at the scene of the murder.
Though it doesn't prove he pulled the trigger, the fingerprint is the final piece of evidence investigators need to bring Tyrone Rosa one important step closer to justice.
With that positive ID, with the physical evidence to support it, that was enough.
At this point, the lead investigator will take all this information and compile it into an arrest warrant, and that's exactly what he did.
On February 18th, 2015, nearly 2 months after Hiram Martinez and DJ Jimenez were shot, Tyrone Rosa is charged with murder, first-degree assault, and criminal gun possession.
Mr. Rosa was arrested for the murder of one gentleman, assault on another gentleman.
He was already remanded to custody because he was on parole, so he's in jail already.
But will prosecutors be able to keep him there?
Throughout the court proceedings, he maintained his innocence. He said, "Someone killed him, but it wasn't me."
On February 2nd, 2015, in Hartford Superior Court, Tyrone Rosa goes on trial for the murder of Hiram Martinez and the assault of DJ Jimenez. In court, Tyrone is stoic.
He was very calm and didn't seem nervous or excited. He's kind of a low energy type of guy.
Prosecutors argue that Tyrone was out for revenge after Hiram told him that he killed Mariano Gonzalez.
The claim was that Mr. Rosa had killed this one gentleman for revenge for a friend of his that had been killed. My client gave a very different version. There was this unknown third person who my client says put a gun to his head and presumably committed the shooting.
There was one young man who really had this expectation of himself to do what was right or what was considered the admirable thing to do and avenge the death of his good friend, his friend's brother. There's no alternative other than to take the same lethal action that was used against the person that he loved.
DJ takes the stand as the state's star witness. He walks the jury through details of Mariano's murder, according to what Hiram told him.
Hiram met up with Mariano Gonzalez on Bond Street in Hartford. He was supposed to buy a gun. DJ says, changed his mind. Now Hiram doesn't want to buy the gun. Mariano was basically set on selling this gun. You're buying this gun. And that's when everything went wrong.
Mariano Gonzalez had actually threatened Hiram Martinez's family.
Hiram has a 3-year-old child and a significant other that clearly he cared about very much. So when someone threatened to wipe out his family, this did not sit the right way. DJ says that's when Hiram told him that he killed Mariano Gonzalez in cold blood.
A week later at the club, when Tyrone Rosa learned that Hiram killed Mariano, Tyrone then set his sights on Hiram. On the stand, DJ recalls the chilling moment that claimed his best friend's life.
Tyrone got out to use the bathroom. Didn't think anything of that, and as he got back in the car, DJ claims he heard a loud bang, covered his ears, realized it was a shooting, got out and ran. At that point, he realized he had been shot as well.
As the defense gets underway, Tyrone Rosa takes the stand.
He admitted to lying to police, and the reason why he lied was because he was on parole and didn't want his parole remanded.
Tyrone admits he did drive around with DJ and Hiram that night.
The police found my client's fingerprints in the car. My client didn't dispute having been in the car. Everybody agreed that he had been in the car. The question was he the shooter?
But Tyrone insists he was not.
There was no forensic evidence that directly tied my client to the shooting. They didn't find the murder weapon, for example. They didn't find any DNA on anything that directly linked my client to the murder. So the lack of that sort of evidence made the trial a credibility contest.
Tyrone offers up what he claims is the truth about what happened that night.
My client testified that while he was urinating, somebody came up behind him, put a gun to his head, and told him, "Don't move. This isn't about you." And then he heard a couple gunshots. Went back to the car where the deceased and Mr. Jimenez were, saw that the deceased had been shot, and took off running.
He basically denied being the person to pull the trigger, and he said it was somebody else who he couldn't identify who was responsible for the murder. He didn't provide any information as far as description or who might have been the person who did this.
Once all the testimony was heard in court, it was up to the jurors to decide this case. It didn't take them long before they came back, and on February 14th, their verdict was guilty.
At sentencing, Tyrone shows no remorse and continues to claim innocence.
And to this day, he's still saying that he's innocent.
The judge sees things differently.
He spoke of the senseless cycle of violence, the tragic nature in which a domino effect happened with these crimes that led to a payback. And Tyrone Rosa was about to pay.
Mr. Rosa was sentenced to 55 years for the murder of Mr. Martinez, and he got an additional 15 years for shooting Mr. Jimenez.
For investigators, this was a relief. They had a conviction. Tyrone Papone Rosa. But remember, there were two crimes here. The payback was preceded by the murder of Mariano Gonzalez.
There was a witness that in fact saw the shooter go through the victim's pockets. DNA testing was done from the victim's pockets, and the recovered DNA evidence actually came back to Hiram Martinez.
Not only did we have the story now of Hiram Martinez telling DJ that he did commit the crime in the murder of Mariano Gonzalez, but DNA evidence confirmed it.
Closed cases cannot fill the holes left by loved ones who will never return.
Even if you do arrest somebody and they get convicted, I still don't think families ever get closure for something like that. It's just a hole ripped in their heart that just lasts forever.
I think people's motivation to avenge a wrong is to make themselves feel better or make someone else feel better. I think there's a deep down desire to correct it. And people think that, well, if I do this, I'm gonna feel better. You might in that instant, you might think you're doing something that's gonna serve another person or yourself, but it doesn't last long. Everyone's life has value.
The air in Portapique on that mid-April night in 2020 held a deceptive crystalline stillness, the kind of quiet that usually signals the deep restorative rest of a community tucked away from the frantic pulse of modern life. It was a place where neighbors were simply friends who shared property lines and the occasional evening drink, where the rustle of the wind through the pines and the rhythmic washing of the Bay of Fundy against the jagged shoreline were the only sounds meant to pierce the darkness. But beneath the surface of this rural sanctuary, a shadow had been metastasizing for years, coiled in the mind of a man who moved among them like a ghost in plain sight. No one could have predicted that the tranquility of their evening would be shattered by the blue and red strobe of emergency lights, not the lights of rescuers coming to save them, but the terrifying imitation of authority turned into a weapon of war. The silence was not broken by a scream at first, but by the sharp rhythmic crack of gunfire that echoed across the water, a sound so alien to this tranquil hamlet that many instinctively mistook it for the popping of a backfiring engine or the snap of heavy timber. The transformation from peace to carnage was absolute and instantaneous, a fracture in reality that would leave 22 lives extinguished and a nation forever haunted by the audacity of the evil that walked among them. In the heart of the darkness, a man sat behind the wheel of a vehicle that looked like a shield of safety, a symbol of protection that every Canadian is taught to trust from the moment they are children. Yet he was using that very illusion to hunt his neighbors like prey in an open-air enclosure. As the smell of cordite began to mingle with the salt air and the orange glow of arson started to lick at the midnight sky, the residents of Portapique found themselves trapped in a nightmare where the predator wore the uniform of their protectors. This was not a random act of chaotic violence. It was a cold, methodical orchestration of slaughter, a meticulously planned theater of terror that stripped away the veneer of Canadian safety and exposed a raw, bleeding wound that would take generations to scab over. Every house that went dark, every phone line that went silent, and every desperate, whispered call for help that dissolved into the static of the night marked the beginning of a descent into hell that would last for 12 agonizing hours. This was a night where the concepts of justice and mercy were obliterated, replaced by the chilling efficiency of a man who had spent years curating his own demise and the destruction of everyone he deemed an obstacle or an afterthought. The world outside remained blissfully unaware of the unfolding massacre, sleeping soundly while death prowled the backroads and forest trails, systematically eliminating the sanctity of hearth and home. As the embers of the first burning homes drifted into the night like dark stars, the true scale of the horror began to emerge, not as a singular event, but as a relentless, moving front of violence that would carve a path of grief from the isolated coastal roads of Nova Scotia down through the unsuspecting heart of the province. This story is not merely about the mechanics of a crime. It is an excavation of the darkness that can hide behind a neighbor's smile, and the terrifying fragility of the systems we depend upon to keep the darkness at bay. It is about the families who went to sleep in the warmth of their beds, only to wake up in the freezing realization that their world had been irrevocably broken. We will peel back the layers of this tragedy, not to sensationalize the violence, but to honor the memory of those who were stolen by an act of monstrous deception. The man behind the wheel believed he was playing a god, orchestrating a final violent exit, but in his wake, he left behind a community that refused to be defined by his malice. This is the chronicle of the longest, coldest night in the history of a province, a journey into the abyss that begins with the sound of a shot in the dark, and ends with the soul-searching of an entire nation attempting to reconcile the fact that sometimes, the monster is not hiding in the woods, but waiting right at your doorstep. Portapique was never meant to be the stage for such a dark theater of human cruelty. It was a sanctuary of maritime charm, a hidden pocket of Nova Scotia where the landscape itself seemed designed to offer refuge from the abrasive pace of the wider world. Tucked away along the northern shores of the Minas Basin, the community consisted of a patchwork of sprawling properties, seasonal cottages, and year-round homes, all nestled amidst a dense tapestry of evergreen forests and winding gravel lanes that meandered toward the churning tidal waters of the Bay of Fundy. The geography here is defined by its isolation and its connection to the sea. The world-famous tides pull the water back for miles, leaving behind a stark, moon-like expanse of mudflats that serves as a constant reminder of the raw, untamable power of nature. For the residents who chose to settle here, this remote existence was a feature, not a bug, offering a rare kind of privacy that allowed them to cultivate deep, informal bonds with the few neighbors they encountered during the long, damp winters and the fleeting, vibrant summers. In the years leading up to the spring of 2020, The social fabric of Portapique felt as sturdy and predictable as the rugged cliffs that flanked the coastline. It was the kind of place where a tractor in a ditch would inevitably draw a helping hand, where the shifting light on the water served as the community clock, and where the most significant disturbances were typically the antics of the local wildlife or the seasonal arrival of tourists. Yet, this very seclusion, which afforded the residents such a profound sense of peace, also served to mask the creeping presence of a man who looked like any other successful professional, but harbored a mind as fractured as the tidal coast itself. Gabriel Wertman, a man who had built a life as a denturist in the bustling, nearby city of Dartmouth, had found his own retreat in Portapique, a property where he could indulge in the solitary and often bizarre preoccupations that defined his existence. To the casual observer, he was an eccentric but ultimately unremarkable neighbor, a man who kept to himself while tending to the affairs of his various properties. Yet beneath that exterior lay an architecture of obsession that was slowly consuming his sanity. The community of Portapique operated on an unspoken contract of mutual respect and minimal interference, which ironically provided the perfect veil for someone who did not wish to be truly seen. In the weeks preceding the tragedy, the landscape of the province had been undergoing its own subtle transformation. The late winter thaw was giving way to an early, tentative spring, and there was a pervasive quiet tension in the air as the world outside began to grapple with the early, paralyzing uncertainties of a global pandemic. This backdrop of collective anxiety and physical distancing inadvertently deepened the sense of isolation that characterized life in the rural reaches of the province, creating a psychological vacuum where paranoia and long-simmering grudges could fester unchecked. The houses, spread apart by long driveways and thick stands of spruce, were beacons of light in the profound darkness of the maritime night, providing no hint that within the shadow of one such home, the boundary between reality and a lethal fantasy was being systematically dismantled. For those who lived in Portapique, the environment was an extension of their identity, deeply tied to the rhythms of the earth and the seasons. Yet that same environment became a labyrinth of traps when the violence finally erupted. The physical layout of the area, with its network of private lanes that connected hidden driveways to the main artery of Highway 2, was a geography that favored the hunter who knew its secrets intimately. By night, these roads were pitch black, illuminated only by the occasional sweep of headlights, making the entire community an island of vulnerability. The very stillness that once provided comfort now served to amplify the impending horror, as the quiet of the woods and the proximity of the bay conspired to trap those who had no way of knowing that the safety they felt within their own walls was already a relic of the past. As we look back at the tranquil, unassuming beauty of Portapique, it is impossible not to feel the weight of the tragedy that was about to unfold, knowing that the pristine nature of this small corner of Nova Scotia would forever be stained by the events of that night, leaving a community to forever question how such a profound darkness could have found a home in their midst, hidden behind the simple, beautiful quiet of their daily lives. The people who would become the casualties of that fateful night were not mere statistics or names etched into a cold monument. They were the heartbeat of Nova Scotia, a tapestry of lives woven into the fabric of a tight-knit, resilient society. Among them were teachers who had spent decades shaping the minds of the next generation, nurses who had devoted their careers to healing the sick, and retirees who had finally found their piece of paradise by the water. There was Greg and Jamie Blair, a couple whose home in Portapique was a hub of warmth and laughter, the kind of place where the door was always unlocked and the coffee was always hot. They were the neighbors everyone relied on. The people who would show up with a trailer to help you move or a shovel to clear your driveway before you even woke up. Their lives were defined by a quiet, steady love for their community and for each other. A commitment to the simple joys of a life built on integrity and kindness. Every morning for them began with the light off the bay, a ritual of coffee and conversation that anchored them in a world that, until that moment, seemed fundamentally good. Then there were those like Lisa McCulley, a devoted educator whose passion for her students was as boundless as the horizon she looked out upon every day. She was the kind of person who saw the potential in everyone, a steady, guiding light for those who struggled, and a pillar of strength within her circle of friends. Her presence in the community was a constant, a reminder that empathy and dedication are the true measures of a life well lived. To imagine her final moments is to confront a profound injustice, for she was a woman whose entire existence was predicated on the preservation and enrichment of life. She was a mother, a daughter, and a friend. Someone whose absence left a void so vast that it seemed to swallow the very air around her family. Her story, like those of so many others lost that night, is a testament to the fact that when a life is taken, it is not just one person who is lost, but an entire universe of memories, dreams, and potential that is extinguished in a single, senseless heartbeat. Think of Jolene Oliver, Aaron Tuck, and their daughter Emily, a family unit that represented the future. Their lives intertwined in a shared pursuit of happiness and connection. They were dreamers who had moved to the coast to build a life of purpose, to raise their child in an environment that celebrated the beauty of the natural world. They were not wealthy in the traditional sense, but they were rich in the ways that mattered most, in their laughter, their shared endeavors, and their unwavering loyalty to one another. Their home was a sanctuary of creativity and warmth, a place where art and music played and where the future was always something to be anticipated, not feared. The sudden, violent termination of their existence did not just break their hearts. It shattered the collective hope of a community that saw in them the very essence of what it meant to belong to a place. Each victim held within them a unique constellation of experiences, a life that had been weathered by the storms of the Atlantic and warmed by the community's embrace. As we hold their memory in the light, we are forced to confront the depth of the betrayal they endured. They were targeted by a man who lived among them, who shared their roads and perhaps even their conversations, yet who viewed them not as neighbors but as obstacles, or perhaps as playthings in a gruesome, preordained fantasy. The tragedy is exacerbated by the knowledge that these were people who had invested themselves in the safety and well-being of those around them. They were the ones who checked on the elderly, who volunteered for local events, and who looked out for the vulnerable. They were the marrow of the province, and their loss was an amputation of the community's own spirit. To understand the gravity of the massacre, one must look past the headlines and see the human faces, the grandmother's smile, the father's steady hand, the teacher's patient gaze. Their stories are the true narrative of Nova Scotia, and while the darkness of that night sought to erase them, their legacies persist in the lives of those who loved them and who now carry the heavy, sacred burden of remembering who they were before the silence fell. The transformation of Portapique from a sanctuary of coastal serenity into a sprawling graveyard began not with a thunderous explosion, but with the chilling mechanical precision of a man who had finally decided to act upon his darkest impulses. It was a late Saturday evening, and the darkness was absolute, thick and heavy, pinning the small community to the earth. Gabriel Wertman, cloaked in the deceptive authority of his carefully curated disguise, stepped into the role he had been rehearsing for years. As he moved through the shadows of his own property, the air grew thick with the smell of gasoline and something metallic, a scent that would soon permeate the very soil of the hamlet. The initial violence was targeted, a cold-blooded liquidation of those who were closest to him, those who knew his temper and the depth of his mounting resentment. He moved with a terrifying ghost-like efficiency, his footsteps swallowed by the soft, damp earth, his actions driven by a singular, pathological need to erase the reality that he felt had failed him. As he set fire to his own home, the flames acted as a beacon of destruction, a pyre for his former life that would draw the attention of the neighbors he intended to hunt. The horror escalated as he transitioned from his private property to the narrow, winding lanes of the community, his vehicle now a predator's mask. He did not rush. He stalked, driving slowly enough to remain inconspicuous, yet fast enough to stay ahead of the confusion he was creating. To the residents who peeked out from behind their curtains at the sight of the emergency lights, there was a fleeting moment of relief that help had arrived, a feeling that quickly curdled into a soul-crushing terror when the silhouette of a uniform did not bring safety but death. The sound of gunshots, once isolated, began to ring out with a rhythmic, sickening persistence, echoing off the trees and across the silent bay. He was methodical, sweeping through the area like a harvester in a field, stopping only to finish what he had started or to move on to his next victim. Each house he visited became a tomb, and as he left, he ensured that his presence was marked by fire, the rising smoke obscuring the moon and signaling the end of life for those inside. What transpired in those first few hours defies simple categorization, as the massacre transcended mere physical violence and entered the realm of psychological warfare. The victims were not just being killed. They were being hunted in their own homes, the very places where they should have been safest. Wertman was exploiting the absolute trust that people place in the symbols of their society, utilizing the badge and the car to bypass the natural defenses of human instinct. As he moved through the dark, he left behind a trail of grief and devastation that was growing exponentially with every minute that passed. The chaos in the community was palpable. Families huddled in basements, whispering into phones, trying to describe a threat that seemed to be everywhere at once. A phantom that wore the face of an officer but carried the heart of a butcher. The 911 dispatchers, struggling to make sense of the fragmented, terrified calls, were trying to map a path of destruction that was shifting by the second, as the killer continued to navigate the backroads with an unnerving, intimate knowledge of the terrain. As the night wore on and the sun remained hours away, the scale of the nightmare began to expand beyond the borders of Portapique. Wertman, his appetite for destruction whetted, began to branch out, his vehicle now a mobile platform for his ongoing vendetta. The isolation that once made the area desirable now served to keep the residents in the dark, unable to know if the killer was at their door or miles away. In the confusion, he encountered individuals purely by chance, people who were simply driving through or waking up to the smell of smoke, and he dispatched them with the same chilling indifference. The emotional toll of this sequence of events is impossible to fully quantify. It was a cascade of shattered lives, a sudden and violent interruption of normalcy that left behind an indelible mark on the landscape of the province. Every gunshot was a severance, a brutal breaking of bonds that had existed for years, and as the night deepened, the realization began to set in that this was not a localized incident, but a systematic, wide-reaching act of terror that would redefine the meaning of safety in the rural Canadian experience. The man in the fake cruiser continued his march, leaving behind a wake of silence that was more terrifying than the noise of the gunfire, a stillness that would soon be filled by the cries of the living and the hollow, heartbreaking absence of the dead. The first light of dawn over Nova Scotia did not bring the promise of a new beginning, but rather a sickening clarity that illuminated the scale of the carnage. As the darkness lifted, it revealed a landscape transformed into a patchwork of ruin and silent, terrifying evidence of the night's work. The discovery of the crime scene was not a singular moment of realization, but a harrowing, fragmented process that stretched across multiple communities and properties. Responding officers arriving in the early morning fog found themselves stepping into a world that felt surreal, a pastoral setting shattered by the visceral, unmistakable signs of an executioner's presence. The air still hung heavy with the acrid, choking scent of smoke, as the charred remains of houses smoldered in the dawn, casting long, mournful shadows across the dew-covered fields. It was the silence that was the most jarring. The birds did not sing, the wind seemed to hold its breath, and the heavy stillness was only broken by the crunch of tires on gravel and the frantic, hushed voices of those beginning to piece together the unimaginable puzzle of where the violence had occurred and who had survived. Walking through these sites felt like trespassing on the sanctity of lives interrupted in their most vulnerable moments. In one home, a table might still be set for a meal that would never be eaten. In another, a child's toy left abandoned on the porch, each item a silent, agonizing monument to the normalcy that had been extinguished just hours before. The evidence left behind was a chaotic map of the killer's path. Shell casings glinting in the grass, forced entries, and the chilling, lingering smell of gasoline that marked the sites of arson. Forensic teams arrived to find that the perpetrator had been meticulous, yet the sheer speed and breadth of his movement had left behind a frantic, desperate wake. Each discovery brought a new layer of horror, as investigators realized the scope of the path taken by the killer. They found vehicles abandoned, some still running, and personal effects strewn across the roadside, the artifacts of a life, and many lives, brutally curtailed. The professional composure of the first responders was pushed to the absolute limit as they navigated the gruesome reality of what they were witnessing. Knowing that every minute they spent processing one location, the killer had potentially moved on to another, leaving more lives in the balance. The initial manhunt was crippled by the very camouflage the killer had employed. The sight of a vehicle that resembled a police cruiser meant that those who encountered it often stopped, expecting to be helped, only to find themselves staring into the barrel of an executioner's weapon. This made the crime scene investigations inherently complex and terrifying. The standard protocols of search and rescue had to be inverted to account for the possibility that the threat was still wearing a badge. As the police began to canvass the area, they were met not just with the physical evidence of death, but with the raw, palpable trauma of the survivors, people emerging from basements and woods with hollow eyes and shaking hands, unable to process the night's events. The stories they told were fragmented, punctuated by long pauses and the struggle to articulate a terror that seemed to defy reason. They spoke of the blue and red lights, the calm demeanor of the man in the uniform, and the sudden jarring transition from the comfort of their homes to the realization that they were being hunted. Each witness testimony became a crucial, agonizing thread in the growing tapestry of the night's events, helping authorities begin to reconstruct the path of the phantom who had terrorized the province. The discovery phase was more than just a gathering of forensic data. It was the unfolding of a national trauma. As the news began to filter out to the wider public, the initial confusion and speculation on social media created a chaotic, distorted narrative that the police were forced to contend with while simultaneously managing a crime scene that spanned dozens of miles. The discrepancy between the official reports and the terrifying reality experienced by the residents created a friction that would haunt the investigation for months to come. The investigators had to grapple with the realization that they were not just looking for a fugitive, but for someone who knew the backroads better than they did, someone who had prepared for this exact moment with a twisted level of detail. The abandoned, torched remains of the killer's own life, his properties, his vehicle, his collection of police paraphernalia, offered a glimpse into the internal, fractured world of the monster, but they provided little comfort to those tasked with finding him. As the day progressed, the realization solidified that this was not a spree that had simply ended, but a movement of violence that had left the entire province under a dark, suffocating shroud, where every passing vehicle became a potential threat and every shadow hid the ghost of the man they were racing to stop. The investigation into the Nova Scotia massacre quickly spiraled from a standard criminal manhunt into a labyrinthine nightmare of confusion and profound systemic failure. As the morning of April 19 unfolded, law enforcement agencies across the province were forced to operate in a fog of war that seemed to thicken with every passing hour. The primary challenge was the sheer audacity of the killer's camouflage, because he was driving a vehicle that was an almost perfect replica of a Royal Canadian Mounted Police cruiser. The standard lines of communication and identification were completely compromised. Dispatchers were inundated with contradictory reports, some claiming the perpetrator was heading north, others citing him in the opposite direction, while residents, paralyzed by the fear that their own protectors had turned against them, were calling in every silver-colored SUV they saw. This created a paralyzing cycle of paralysis where the authorities were effectively chasing a ghost that could hide in plain sight, pulling up alongside terrified civilians who had no way of knowing if the person in the driver's seat was there to save them or to execute them. Behind the scenes, the investigative machinery was grinding against the reality of a suspect who had spent years preparing for this exact scenario. It became evident that Gabriel Wertman was not merely a man who had snapped in a moment of passion. He was a man who had curated the infrastructure of his own hunt. As teams searched his properties, they discovered a chillingly organized hoard of police paraphernalia, decals, radios, uniforms, and equipment that suggested he had been living a double life for a long time. Investigators found themselves chasing a suspect who knew the backroads and the private logging paths of the region better than the officers tasked with finding him. These roads, which functioned as the veins and arteries of the rural landscape, provided a near-perfect escape route for someone who understood how to exploit the vast, unmonitored wilderness of the Maritimes. Every time police set up a roadblock or established a perimeter, the perpetrator seemed to slip through the gaps, navigating the network of gravel trails with an unnerving, almost supernatural ease that left the authorities grasping at shadows. The investigation was further complicated by the internal friction within the responding agencies and the agonizingly slow process of information flow to the public. As the death toll rose and the massacre expanded across different municipalities, the lack of a clear, unified communication strategy left residents to rely on fragmented, panic-fueled reports from social media. This created an environment of pervasive mistrust, where the very people supposed to be following police instructions were instead hiding in the woods, terrified that the next blue light they saw would be the last thing they ever witnessed. Detectives and tactical teams were stretched to their absolute breaking point, their efforts hampered by the exhaustion of a 12-hour pursuit and the psychological toll of discovering new crime scenes, one after another, in a relentless, exhausting rhythm. They were not just searching for a man. They were searching for a motive that remained elusive, hidden behind the charred ruins of the killer's past and the impenetrable wall of his own pathological silence. Meanwhile, The investigation reached a series of dead ends that added to the mounting frustration of the detectives. They followed leads to various properties only to find them empty or already engulfed in flames, the killer's trail consistently erased by his systematic use of fire. The psychological profile of the perpetrator remained opaque, a jagged puzzle of narcissism, paranoia, and obsessive control that refused to fit into any traditional criminal framework. Every lead felt like a step behind him, a frantic attempt to play catch-up with someone who was always one move ahead, anticipating their tactics and exploiting their reliance on conventional procedures. The detectives on the ground were battling not just an elusive suspect, but a sense of helplessness that began to settle into the collective consciousness of the force. The investigation became a grueling, agonizing test of endurance, where every passing minute without a successful interception felt like a personal failure, and the mounting list of casualties served as a constant, crushing reminder of the stakes. The hunt was turning into a desperate, high-stakes game of cat and mouse where the cat had been given the keys to the city, and the mouse was running out of places to hide in the darkening, unfolding tragedy of the Nova Scotian countryside. The turning point in the hunt for the Phantom of Nova Scotia did not arrive through a masterstroke of detective work or a breakthrough in high-tech surveillance, but rather through the gritty, unpredictable intersection of chance and the vigilance of those who refused to be victims. As the morning of April 19th began to burn off the coastal mist, the entire province was effectively under siege, a state of collective terror where the standard geography of life had been replaced by a map of fear. Police were exhausted, their morale battered by the relentless discovery of new crime scenes, and the agonizing realization that the killer was utilizing their own iconography to perpetuate his reign of horror. However, the desperation of the manhunt began to shift as the scope of the threat became clear, forcing a pivot from search and contain to a desperate, aggressive interception. The breakthrough was not the result of a single clue, but the culmination of 1,000 eyes turned toward the road, as every citizen in the province became an involuntary participant in the search for the silver Chevrolet that had become the most feared object in Canada. The decisive moment unfolded at a gas station in Enfield, a quiet, unremarkable stop that would serve as the final chapter in the killer's long, blood-soaked odyssey. The perpetrator, perhaps finally feeling the noose tightening as law enforcement coordination improved and his movements became more predictable, had pulled into the station, likely to refuel or perhaps driven by a sense of impending inevitability. There, a sharp-eyed officer, operating on the razor's edge of exhaustion and hypervigilance, caught sight of the suspect. It was a moment of profound, visceral intensity where years of training and the cumulative, agonizing pressure of the past 12 hours crystallized into a single kinetic decision. The officer did not hesitate, recognizing the silhouette, not as a colleague to be greeted, but as the monster who had been tearing the heart out of their home province. The encounter was swift, brutal, and final, a violent resolution to a night that had defied all logic and mercy, effectively ending the most lethal rampage in the history of the country. This breakthrough was not a moment of celebration. It was a release of a suffocating, unbearable tension that had gripped the entire nation. When the word finally spread that the threat had been neutralized, the initial reaction was not triumph but a profound, hollow stillness, a collective gasp for air after a night of holding it in terror. The breakthrough revealed the fragility of the killer's facade. The man who had spent his life meticulously constructing a persona of authority had been dismantled by the very institutions he sought to subvert. The realization that he had fallen at a roadside pump, far from the grand, delusional finale he might have imagined for himself, stripped away the last remnants of the power he had tried to project. He was just a man, vulnerable and mortal, stopped in his tracks by the commitment of the officers he had so desperately tried to emulate. This moment of closure, however, only served as the opening of a much deeper, more painful chapter of discovery and grief for those he left behind. As the smoke cleared and the forensic team swarmed the final crime scene, the breakthrough provided the investigators with the physical center of the case, the body of the man who had been the architect of the nightmare. This allowed the narrative to shift from the frantic, paralyzed search for a moving target to the methodical, agonizing reconstruction of his path. They began to recover the digital footprints he left behind, the planning documents, the cache of weapons, and the chilling evidence of his long-standing obsession. The breakthrough was the key that unlocked the vault of his secrets, allowing the authorities to begin to map the timeline of his radicalization and the specific events that had triggered the final outburst. Yet, for the families of the victims, this success offered little solace. It was a cold, clinical conclusion to a horror that had permanently altered the trajectory of their lives. The hunt had ended, the monster was gone, but the breakthrough only served to underscore the terrifying reality of what had been lost, marking the transition from a night of active, pulsating terror to a long, enduring season of sorrow that would test the resilience of an entire province. The courtroom became a vessel for a grief that had no natural outlet, a place where the jagged pieces of a shattered reality were gathered, examined, and laid bare under the unsparing lights of justice. Although the man responsible for the carnage had been silenced at that gas station, the process of reckoning was far from over. Instead of a single defendant standing in the dock, the proceedings became a sprawling multi-year inquiry, an agonizingly slow and meticulous dissection of the events that had culminated on that April night. For the families of the 22 victims, the justice system felt less like a sanctuary and more like an instrument of further trauma, as they were forced to relive every detail of the horror through exhaustive testimonies and the cold, clinical presentation of forensic evidence. The hearings, which spanned across various venues, were designed to be a crucible of accountability, probing how a system meant to protect could have allowed such a monster to flourish, operate, and eventually execute his vision of terror with such terrifying ease. Each day was a weight upon the souls of the survivors, who sat in the gallery with their memories, listening as the machinery of the law picked apart the life of the man who had stolen their peace. The courtroom atmosphere was heavy with an almost tangible sorrow, punctuated by the sharp intake of breath whenever a new detail emerged about the final moments of a loved one. The legal discourse moved between the technicalities of police response protocols, the gaps in surveillance, and the haunting unanswered questions regarding the killer's psychological decline. It was an environment where the banality of bureaucratic testimony clashed violently with the visceral pain of those who had lost everything. The families of the fallen were not just spectators, they were the moral center of the room, their quiet presence a silent condemnation of the systems that had failed them. Every report, every witness statement, and every recommendation brought forward by the inquiry was a testament to the fact that justice, in the aftermath of such a catastrophe, is a fragile and deeply unsatisfying concept. The focus shifted from the punishment of a single individual, which was rendered impossible by his death, to the structural interrogation of a nation's safety apparatus, a shift that provided little comfort to those whose lives were permanently severed from their former selves. As the legal proceedings drew to a close and the final reports were issued, the sense of resolution remained elusive. The findings were comprehensive, detailing the systemic failures in communication, the delays in public warnings, and the disturbing reality of how a killer could have so effectively mimicked the state's own authority. The justice delivered was one of policy, of revised protocols, and of institutional self-reflection, a sterile substitute for the restitution that the families had truly desired. There was no gavel bang that could bring back a father, no verdict that could mend the silence in a house where a teacher once laughed, and no legislative change that could retroactively shield the victims from the horror they endured. The courtroom experience reinforced the painful truth that in the wake of such monumental evil, the legal system serves primarily as a container for collective mourning, a mechanism that organizes the trauma into a narrative but ultimately fails to resolve the fundamental, gnawing questions of why such things are permitted to happen in a civilized society. The conclusion of these formal processes left the survivors in a strange, lingering limbo. They had been heard, their stories recorded for the historical record, and the failings of the state had been publicly acknowledged, yet the grief remained as acute as the day it began. The courtroom had provided a space for the truth to be spoken, but it could not provide the closure that only time and the slow process of healing could offer. As the doors closed on the final inquiry session, the weight of the tragedy did not dissipate. It simply settled into a new, permanent form, a part of the landscape of their lives that they would be forced to navigate for the rest of their days. The justice they sought had been partially realized in the acknowledgement of fault, but the final, true verdict was written in the absence of the 22, a void that no legal process could ever truly fill. The courtroom had become a memorial of sorts, a place where the echoes of the tragedy were finally allowed to rest, leaving behind the somber, enduring legacy of a community that had been forced to learn the hardest, most devastating lessons about the cost of living in a world where the mask of peace can be torn away at any moment. The echoes of that April night still resonate through the pine forests and tidal flats of Nova Scotia, a somber, lingering vibration that refuses to fade into the silence of history. In the years since the massacre, the physical landscape has been slowly reclaimed by the resilient growth of spring, but the internal geography of the community remains scarred, a terrain where the topography of grief is constantly being redrawn. Reflection on such a tragedy is not a process of finding easy answers or neat, comforting conclusions, but rather an ongoing engagement with the profound, irreducible reality of loss. We are left to grapple with the terrifying truth that the systems we trust to safeguard our existence are inherently human, and therefore susceptible to the same fractures, oversights, and vulnerabilities that plague us all. The legacy of those 22 lives is not found in the sterile recommendations of a government report, but in the enduring quiet strength of the families who have chosen, day by agonizing day, to carry the memory of their loved ones forward into a world that feels permanently less safe and more fragile than the one they once knew. As we look back, the massacre serves as a harrowing, permanent marker in the Canadian consciousness, a threshold that separates the period of innocence from the current reality of heightened awareness. It forced a national reckoning with the quiet, festering dangers that can hide behind the veneer of a neighborly, pastoral life, prompting a long, uncomfortable dialogue about the proliferation of arms and the ease with which individuals can subvert the symbols of institutional trust. Yet, beyond the political and social discourse lies the deeper, more spiritual imperative to honor the humanity that was so brutally extinguished. The victims were not pawns in a madman's game. They were the pillars of their community, the storytellers, the caregivers, and the dreamers who gave Nova Scotia its unique, resilient character. To remember them is to consciously choose to celebrate the lives that were stolen, ensuring that their names are not tethered forever to the darkness of the night they died, but rather to the enduring warmth of the light they brought to everyone they touched. The aftermath of such profound violence is never really finished. It is a long, arduous process of reconstruction that occurs within the hearts of those who remain. The survivors, the first responders, and the entire province have been bonded by a shared, traumatic experience that transcends words, creating a silent fraternity of those who know the true cost of peace. In the face of a darkness so absolute, the only truly defiant act is the continuation of life, the stubborn insistence on kindness, and the refusal to let the perpetrator's legacy be one of permanent division or fear. The communities have had to learn how to exist in the shadow of the events, finding small sacred ways to reclaim their sense of home. The planting of memorial gardens, the annual moments of silence, and the simple, quiet act of looking out for one another with a newfound protective vigilance. These are the threads that bind the community back together, a tapestry of resilience woven from the raw, exposed nerves of a people who have walked through the fire and returned to tell the tale. Ultimately, the message to be taken from this abyss is a sobering, existential mandate to be more present, more observant, and more deeply connected to those around us. We are reminded that the mundane, everyday moments, a conversation across a fence, a morning coffee, the quiet observation of the tides, are not trivial, but are the very foundation of the human experience. The man who orchestrated the massacre sought to destroy that foundation, to replace connection with chaos, but he failed in the only way that truly mattered. He could not erase the love that defined the lives of his victims. That love continues to radiate outward, carried by those who were left behind, serving as a beacon that cuts through the fog of memory and keeps the focus on the enduring sanctity of life. We close this chapter not with a sense of closure, but with a profound, humble commitment to witness the truth, to carry the memory of the fallen, and to hold tightly to the flickering, precious light of humanity, knowing that in a world of profound uncertainty, the most radical and powerful thing we can do is to remain kind, remain watchful, and remain together. The final resonance of the Nova Scotia tragedy is not found in the resolution of legal inquiries or the cessation of headlines, but in the quiet, persistent act of collective remembering that happens in the hearts of the people every single day. As time moves forward, the sharp edges of the initial shock may soften, yet the absence left by the 22 individuals remains a palpable, defining feature of the province's landscape. This enduring presence serves as a silent vigil, a reminder that the cost of such violence is not just the lives taken, but the permanent alteration of the lives that continue. The community has had to navigate the difficult transition from a state of acute, paralyzing trauma to a new, altered normalcy where the memory of that April night is woven into the very fabric of daily existence. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit that despite being subjected to an act of such calculated cruelty, those who remain have refused to let their lives be solely defined by the malice of a single man. This journey through the darkness has left an indelible imprint on the soul of the country, sparking a transformation that goes far beyond the implementation of new policies or the tightening of regulations. It has fostered a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the fragility of rural life and the necessity of looking out for one another in ways that were perhaps taken for granted before. The legacy of the massacre is, in many ways, an invitation to a more vigilant compassion, a call for citizens to be more aware of the signs of isolation and the quiet struggles that can sometimes escalate into unimaginable consequences. By turning toward each other in the aftermath, the survivors and the community at large have created a protective barrier of solidarity, proving that the most effective response to hatred is the deliberate, unwavering cultivation of community. The tragedy did not break the spirit of Nova Scotia. It revealed the hidden, structural strength of its people, who have chosen to rebuild not by forgetting, but by acknowledging the pain and using it as a foundation for a more intentional, connected future. As the years continue to pass, the stories of those who were lost will likely transition from the sharp, immediate memory of the grieving to the storied, historical consciousness of the province. They will be remembered not only as victims but as teachers, parents, friends, and neighbors whose lives were intrinsically linked to the beauty and quiet dignity of the land they called home. Their impact continues to ripple outward, influencing the way we view our neighbors, the way we handle the symbols of our institutions, and the way we prioritize the safety and well-being of those around us. The shadow of the perpetrator has been effectively eclipsed by the light of the legacies left by the fallen, and this, ultimately, is the only true victory that can be claimed in the wake of such a horror. The narrative of Portapique and the surrounding communities is no longer just one of terror. It is a narrative of endurance, a long, sustained note of remembrance that honors the sanctity of life in the face of death. We are left, finally, with the realization that the search for meaning in the face of such a disaster is an endless, evolving task. It is a responsibility that we all share, to bear witness to the truth of what happened, and to ensure that the lessons learned are not lost to the erosion of time. By holding on to the memory of those lost, we are fundamentally refusing to allow their lives to be reduced to the circumstances of their deaths. We choose instead to celebrate their humanity, to keep their voices alive through our own commitment to kindness, and to maintain a steadfast, protective watch over the peace of our own communities. The story of Nova Scotia's darkest hour is now, and will always be, a story of how a community looked into the abyss and, rather than being consumed by it, found the strength to hold each other, to mourn their dead with dignity, and to move forward with the profound, heavy, and sacred understanding that every single day of peace is a gift to be cherished, defended, and shared with those around us. The final chapter of this narrative is not one of closure, for there is no such thing as closure when a life is severed with such cold, surgical precision. Rather, it is a testament to the endurance of memory and the quiet, persistent work of healing that continues long after the cameras have left and the headlines have faded. The land itself, the gentle curves of the Portapique coastline and the deep, silent woods of the surrounding hills, has become a living monument, a place where the wind carries not just the scent of the salt and spruce, but the echoes of 22 lives that were once vibrantly, beautifully ordinary. To walk these paths now is to engage in a pilgrimage of sorts, a way of acknowledging the reality of the horror while simultaneously rejecting the idea that it has the final say in the story of this province. The survivors, the families of the victims, and the first responders who were thrust into the furnace of that night are the true custodians of this history, and their resilience is the bedrock upon which a new, more vigilant understanding of community is being constructed, one day at a time. The lessons forged in the fire of that April weekend have become part of the collective identity of Nova Scotia, a province that now carries the weight of its history with a mix of sorrow and solemn determination. There is a heightened consciousness here, a realization that safety is not a static state of affairs that can be outsourced to institutions alone, but a shared responsibility that requires the active participation of every individual. This transition from a state of unquestioning trust to one of cautious, empathetic connection is perhaps the most significant, if quiet, transformation to emerge from the tragedy. People look out for one another differently now. There is a deeper recognition of the silent struggles that might be occurring behind closed doors, a more deliberate effort to bridge the gaps of isolation that can allow such dangerous pathologies to fester. The trauma has been transmuted, however slowly and painfully, into a mandate for a kinder, more observant society, where the value of a neighbor is measured not by proximity, but by the strength of the bond that ties us to one another. We must also confront the enduring ghost of the perpetrator, not by indulging in the fascination that his own ego demanded, but by stripping away the mask of power he tried so hard to build. His legacy is one of failure, a failure of morality, of humanity, and of spirit, and by focusing on the light left behind by his victims, we actively dismantle the darkness he sought to cast. The archives of the inquiry, the forensic details, and the grim chronology serve only as tools for understanding the mechanism of the disaster, so that it may never be repeated, but they do not define the narrative of the province. The true narrative is found in the continued existence of the families, in the children who are growing up in the shadow of this loss but who are being taught the value of kindness, and in the strength of a community that has refused to be dismantled by a singular, catastrophic act of hate. This is the ultimate defiance: to live, to love, and to remember with a heart that, though scarred, remains open to the beauty of the world. As we step away from this account, we carry with us the heavy, sacred responsibility of witness. To speak the names of the departed, to acknowledge the weight of their absence, and to honor the resilience of those who survived is a way of ensuring that the horror of that night does not remain a closed, sterile fact of the past, but a living lesson that informs our present. We are reminded that the peace we enjoy is a fragile, precious thing, sustained by the unseen efforts of those who care for each other in the quiet, mundane hours of their lives. In the end, the story of the Nova Scotia massacre is not merely about the death of 22 people, but about the profound, unbreakable capacity of the human heart to mourn, to endure, and ultimately to hope. It is a story that belongs to the entire country, a permanent mark on the national psyche that demands we remain vigilant, compassionate, and unwavering in our commitment to the sanctity of life, ensuring that the light of those we have lost continues to shine through the long, long reaches of the future. The final reckoning with a tragedy of this magnitude is not found in the resolution of a single event, but in the slow, agonizing process of weaving the memory of those lost into the ongoing, daily rhythm of a community that has been irrevocably changed. As years turn into a decade, the narrative of that night in April 2020 has evolved from a frantic report of terror into a sober, reflective history that defines the resilience of Nova Scotia. The physical spaces where the violence unfolded have not been erased. Instead, they have been reclaimed and repurposed as sites of quiet contemplation, where the tragedy is acknowledged without the necessity of reliving the trauma. The people who were once neighbors to a killer and victims of a monster are now the architects of a collective healing that prioritizes empathy and the radical act of staying connected in a world that often encourages fragmentation. This effort requires a profound daily courage, the courage to show up for one another, to listen to the unspoken grief that still lingers, and to recognize that the strength of a community is best measured not by how it stands in the calm, but by how it rebuilds when the storms have torn the roof from its houses. There is a profound, almost spiritual dimension to this ongoing survival, a commitment to ensuring that the tragedy does not become the defining feature of the province's identity. Instead, Nova Scotia has emerged as a beacon of what it means to face the impossible and remain intact, a place where the collective consciousness is now permanently tuned to the necessity of looking out for the vulnerable. The institutions that failed on that night have been forced to undergo a painful, public shedding of their own inadequacies, and while the path to institutional reform is never straight, the dialogue has been permanently shifted. The conversation about public safety, about the nature of policing, and about the responsibilities of the state to its citizens is no longer a theoretical exercise. It is rooted in the hard, visceral data of 22 lives that can never be returned. This is the enduring, heavy, and sacred tax that the community has paid to the altar of progress, a debt that will continue to be settled by every subsequent generation that learns the history of this night and chooses to lead with compassion rather than fear. What remains, when all the analysis and all the official reports have been filed away into the archives, is the undeniable, radiant humanity of the individuals who were stolen. Their stories are not static. They are being written anew every day through the lives of those they loved, who continue to find joy, purpose, and connection in a world that feels both more fragile and more precious. To witness this is to understand that the true power of the human spirit lies in its ability to absorb the most extreme forms of darkness and still produce life, warmth, and the quiet, stubborn insistence on the future. We are not just remembering the dead. We are honoring the integrity of the life they lived, the roles they filled in the community, and the legacy of kindness that they left in the hearts of those who knew them. This is the true final testament of Nova Scotia, that even in the face of an orchestrated campaign of evil, the fundamental bonds of human affection proved stronger, more persistent, and more enduring than the fleeting, destructive impulse of the perpetrator. In the quiet hours when the wind settles over the Bay of Fundy and the stars look down upon the small, scattered homes of the region, the memory of that night remains a silent sentinel. It is a reminder that the world is a place of profound dualities, where the most beautiful peace can exist in the same space as the most terrifying violence, and where the outcome of our collective existence depends entirely on our commitment to one another. We close this account with the humble acknowledgement that we are all witnesses to this history, that the story of these 22 lives is now a part of our own, and that we have a shared duty to ensure that the light they provided is never dimmed by the shadows that once sought to extinguish it. The journey through the valley of the shadow of death has been long, the path has been jagged and cruel, but the destination, a place of remembrance, of resilience, and of an unyielding protective love, is one that has been earned through the greatest of sacrifices. Nova Scotia stands not as a broken monument, but as a living, breathing testament to the fact that while darkness may descend, it can never hold the horizon, and the dawn will always eventually return to the bay. The finality of the tragedy, when viewed across the expansive horizon of time, is not a period at the end of a sentence but a pause in a long, ongoing melody of remembrance. As we step back from the granular details of the investigation and the clinical analysis of the systemic failures, what remains is the profound, irreducible essence of the lives that were so abruptly taken. This is the bedrock of our understanding, the sacred core that refuses to be diminished by the passage of the years or the inevitable fading of public memory. The families of the victims have become the quiet guardians of a flame that serves to illuminate the path forward, demonstrating a capacity for grace that defies the logic of the violence they endured. Their journey is not one of moving on in the sense of leaving the past behind, but rather one of carrying it forward as an integral, formative part of their being, a weight that is shared among the community until it becomes a form of collective strength rather than a solitary burden. The landscape of Nova Scotia, with its dramatic tides and sweeping coastal vistas, continues to bear witness to this transformation, acting as a silent, natural cathedral for the grief that has been transmuted into a quiet, enduring resolve. We are forced to recognize that the most significant legacy of this event is the fundamental shift in the province's soul, a recalibration of what it means to belong to one another in an increasingly complex and fragile world. The masks of civility that we wear in our daily interactions are now tempered with a deeper, more profound awareness of how quickly they can be stripped away, and this realization has fostered a more intentional, deliberate form of kindness. It is a protective, communal instinct, a refusal to be alienated from one another by the very fears that the perpetrator sought to exploit. People now see the value in the small, seemingly inconsequential gestures of support, the check-in calls, the shared meals, and the simple act of presence, understanding that these are the true barriers against the darkness. This collective response is the ultimate refutation of the killer's nihilism. By choosing to lean into each other rather than retreating into suspicion, the community has effectively neutralized the long-term impact of his hatred, proving that the foundation of their humanity is far more robust than he could have ever imagined or understood. The historical record will always hold the chilling facts of the massacre, the timeline of the terror, and the systematic failures of the authorities, but these are merely the technical components of a much larger, more human story that refuses to be contained by a report. That story is written in the resilience of the survivors, in the voices of those who continue to advocate for a safer, more transparent society, and in the quiet, persistent memories of those who loved the victims and continue to live their lives in their honor. The massacre has become a permanent, haunting reference point in the Canadian identity, a standard against which we now measure our commitment to public safety and our duty to the vulnerable among us. It serves as an internal compass, a reminder that the cost of apathy is too high, and that the protection of the innocent is a task that never truly concludes, but must be renewed with every sunrise. We hold this history with a trembling, reverent hand, knowing that it is not ours to resolve, but ours to bear as a cautionary, holy witness to the fragility of our peace. As we conclude this reflection on the darkest night in the history of the Maritimes, we are left with a quiet, lingering sense of duty that transcends the boundaries of this specific tragedy. We are reminded that we are all, in a sense, connected by the shared vulnerability of the human condition, and that the light we carry is only as bright as our willingness to shield it for one another. The memory of the 22 lives is not a ghost to be feared, but a guide to be followed, a call to live with more purpose, to love with more intensity, and to watch over each other with a vigilance born of a hard-won, devastating knowledge. The silence of the Portapique Woods is no longer a vacuum. It is filled with the enduring, defiant echoes of those who were stolen, a chorus of voices that reminds us that while the shadow may be long, it is the light that defines the land. We move forward not with the illusion of perfect safety, but with the profound, grounding truth that when the darkness comes, the only way through it is together, anchored by the memory of those we have lost and propelled by the sacred, persistent, and unyielding hope that defines our shared, collective humanity. The quietude that now blankets the rolling hills and sheltered coves of the Maritimes serves as a testament to a resilience that is as deep and enduring as the ocean itself. When we contemplate the legacy of the Nova Scotia massacre from the vantage point of the present, we are not looking at a closed chapter, but rather a profound shift in the very atmosphere of the province. The tragedy functioned as a crucible, a brutal and necessary burning away of the illusion that rural isolation equated to absolute immunity from the darker currents of human behavior. In the years that have followed, the communities that were once fractured by fear have painstakingly reassembled, not into the people they were before, but into a society that is fundamentally more aware, more protective, and more deeply connected. This metamorphosis has not been effortless. It has been a process of navigating the wreckage of the past, while simultaneously trying to build a future that honors the memory of those who were extinguished. The survivors have found that the only way to endure the weight of their grief is to externalize it, to create spaces where the pain can be acknowledged, shared, and ultimately transformed into a collective resolve to prevent such a rupture from ever occurring again. This evolution in the provincial character is perhaps best seen in the way that local bonds have been fortified, creating a network of vigilance that is built on empathy rather than suspicion. There is an unspoken understanding that has taken root among the residents, a shared recognition that the person in the house down the road, the neighbor in the next village, and the stranger on the highway are all participants in the same vulnerable existence. This awareness has replaced the naive, comfortable silence of the past with a watchful, active, and deeply rooted sense of community responsibility. It is a proactive form of care, one that recognizes the early, subtle warning signs of isolation or despair and attempts to address them long before they can be channeled into destructive action. This is the most profound victory over the perpetrator's intent. He aimed to create a landscape of terror and fragmentation, but instead, he inadvertently triggered a process of integration and heightened social awareness that has made the region more cohesive than it had been in decades. The academic and governmental obsession with the mechanics of the failure, the radio systems, the delayed alerts, the tactical errors, has been necessary for institutional growth, but it remains secondary to the emotional and social work that has been performed by the individuals who remain. They have become the stewards of a memory that is both heavy and illuminating, ensuring that the names of the victims are not merely etched on a stone monument, but are kept alive through the active pursuit of a better, safer, and more compassionate society. This is the true living legacy of the massacre, a commitment to the sanctity of life that transcends the clinical observations of the courtroom or the formal language of the inquiry reports. The victims, through the lives of those they touched, continue to influence the trajectory of their communities, their absences leaving a shape in the world that is constantly being filled with new acts of service, new friendships, and a renewed dedication to the common good. We must also recognize the role of time in this process, as it serves as both a healer and a keeper of the truth. While the raw, jagged intensity of the initial shock has transitioned into a more manageable, steady pulse of remembrance, the core of the tragedy remains a foundational element of the Nova Scotian experience. It is a reminder that beauty and terror are often neighbors, and that the peace we find in the quiet spaces of our lives is a privilege that must be guarded by our own constant vigilance. The story of those 12 hours in April 2020 has become a permanent feature of the Canadian moral landscape, a reference point for all subsequent discussions on safety, accountability, and the power of communal grief. We close this final reflection with the humble recognition that we are all, in a sense, residents of this scarred but beautiful land, and that the story of these 22 lives is a part of our own moral inheritance. We honor them best not by dwelling on the mechanisms of their end, but by committing ourselves to the preservation of the light they left behind, ensuring that the spirit of Nova Scotia remains defined not by the darkness of one man's rage, but by the overwhelming, persistent, and unyielding strength of a people who choose, against all odds, to keep moving forward together, united by the memory of the past and the shared hope for a safer, brighter tomorrow. The tapestry of remembrance woven in the wake of the Nova Scotia tragedy has become an indelible part of the landscape, a mantle of collective experience that every resident of the province now wears as a reminder of the fragility of the peace they once held as a birthright. As we look across the expanse of the years since that night in April, it becomes increasingly clear that the true measure of the recovery is found not in the return to normalcy, but in the deliberate construction of a new reality that acknowledges the persistence of grief while refusing to be suffocated by it. The communities of Portapique and the surrounding areas have developed a quiet, stoic grace, a way of carrying the weight of their history that is both honorable and profoundly human. They have learned that the process of healing is not a destination to be reached, but a state of existence, a constant flickering balance between the recognition of what has been lost and the necessary, rhythmic continuation of life in all its messy, beautiful uncertainty. This is the ultimate defiance against the shadow that sought to erase them. It is the insistence that even in a world capable of such incomprehensible violence, the impulse toward restoration, toward connection, and toward the simple, quiet preservation of one another remains the most powerful force of all. We have arrived at a deeper understanding of the vulnerability that exists within the very architecture of our society, particularly in the secluded corners where independence is cherished and the presence of the state is often felt only at the margins. The massacre served as a mirror, reflecting back a version of ourselves that we were perhaps hesitant to confront, a society that had grown complacent in its assumptions of safety and slow to recognize the warning signs of internal breakdown. By forcing this uncomfortable, necessary self-examination, the tragedy has catalyzed a transition toward a more integrated, communicative model of rural living. The sense of isolation that once protected the killer's secrets has been replaced by a communal vigilance that acts as a subtle, persistent safety net, ensuring that those who might be drifting toward the darkness are seen, reached, and supported long before they can become a threat to others. This shift is perhaps the most significant outcome of the long, painful period of reflection that followed the events, a sign that the collective trauma has been successfully transmuted into a proactive, social wisdom that serves as the most effective defense against future catastrophes of this nature. In the final reckoning, we are left to hold the memory of the 22 lives not as a burden, but as a compass, an internal guide that directs our focus toward the preservation of dignity and the sanctity of the human connection. Their names have become synonymous with a resilience that is not loud or performative, but deep, internal, and unshakable. They represent the best of the coastal spirit, the warmth of the hearth, and the steady guiding hand of those who contribute to the fabric of their community without expectation of reward or recognition. To remember them is to commit ourselves to the same values they held, the values of kindness, neighborliness, and the relentless, stubborn pursuit of a life well lived in the service of others. This is the legacy that endures long after the dust of the inquests has settled, a living, breathing testament that the darkness, no matter how absolute it may seem in the moment of its arrival, is fundamentally transient, whereas the impact of a life rooted in love and connection is eternal and ever-expanding, rippling forward into the future in ways that we can only begin to perceive. As we conclude this long and sorrowful observation, we carry with us the grounding truth that our lives are defined by the company we keep and the empathy we extend in the face of suffering. We are all inhabitants of the same fragile world, and the story of the Nova Scotian experience is a mirror held up to our own existence, asking us to be more present, more watchful, and more deeply committed to the well-being of those who share our path. The memory of the lost is a sacred inheritance, a repository of hope that demands our protection and our continued reflection. We do not walk away from this history, but rather walk forward with it, fortified by the knowledge that even when the light is extinguished, the warmth it left behind remains to guide us through the cold. Nova Scotia stands as a living testament to the fact that when a community is struck, it does not shatter, but rather shifts, adapts, and grows in ways that honor the past while bravely facing the light of a new day, unified by the unbreakable promise that they will continue to walk the long road together, bound by love, tempered by sorrow, and forever illuminated by the enduring quiet and triumphant memory of those they will never forget. The passage of time acts as both a relentless tide and a gentle balm, gradually softening the jagged edges of memory, even as it cements the significance of the Nova Scotia tragedy within the historical bedrock of the nation. As we continue to process the remnants of that April night, we find that the conversation has shifted from the shock of the event itself to a deeper, more philosophical inquiry into the nature of social cohesion and the inherent responsibilities we hold toward one another in an increasingly fragmented world. The massacre now serves as a perennial touchstone for all discussions regarding safety, trust, and the delicate balance between personal privacy and collective security, forcing a continuous, iterative reassessment of how we exist in the rural spaces that define so much of the Canadian experience. It is a dialogue that is conducted not only in the hallowed halls of government or the formal pages of inquiry reports but in the quiet, everyday conversations among neighbors who have learned, through the hardest possible lessons, that their safety is a shared project rather than a guaranteed state of being. The transition from the acute phase of trauma to this more chronic, contemplative state of awareness is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, which possesses an almost supernatural capacity to integrate the most devastating of experiences into the narrative of life without allowing those experiences to dictate the final, closing act. This ongoing integration has fostered a new kind of provincial character, one that is characterized by a sophisticated blend of skepticism and profound empathy. Residents of Nova Scotia now possess a heightened intuition, a quiet vigilance that allows them to scan their environment for signs of discord, while simultaneously nurturing the bonds of friendship and family that constitute the real, meaningful core of their lives. The tragedy has effectively stripped away the thin veneer of unthinking trust that once defined the rural experience, replacing it with a more grounded, realistic, and protective form of community affection. It is a way of living that acknowledges the possibility of darkness without surrendering to it, a strategy of survival that involves the constant, intentional reinforcement of social ties. This is not a state of perpetual fear, but rather a state of perpetual alertness, where the well-being of the community is treated as a foundational element of everyday existence, as vital and consistent as the tides themselves. The people have turned their collective grief into a source of enduring strength, ensuring that the void left by those who were taken is filled, day by day, with the continued stubborn persistence of their own humanity and their refusal to let the shadow of one man define the destiny of their province. Looking forward, the legacy of the Nova Scotia massacre will continue to unfold in the lives of those who were never directly touched by the violence, but who have inherited the lessons of the event as part of their national consciousness. The story has become a foundational myth of sorts, a cautionary tale that underscores the necessity of institutional transparency, the value of communal vigilance, and the supreme importance of the life-giving bonds that sustain us. It is a story that will be told to future generations not to inspire terror, but to instill a deep, reverent appreciation for the peace they enjoy and the collective effort required to maintain it. The victims, whose lives were extinguished in the prime of their potential, now occupy a permanent place in the moral architecture of the country, representing the standard against which we measure our commitment to one another. Their loss was a seismic event that permanently altered the geography of the community, but in the wake of the tremors, the people have built something new, something that is perhaps more resilient, more aware, and more deeply connected to the values of kindness and mutual support that were the true, enduring hallmarks of the people they were. As we bring this reflection to its eventual quiet close, we carry the weight of this knowledge as a sacred obligation to remain awake, to remain engaged, and to remain inextricably linked to the humanity of our neighbors. The memory of the April massacre is a flame that must be shielded with the utmost care, not merely out of respect for the dead, but for the preservation of our own collective future. It is a reminder that the world remains a place of vast, unpredictable dangers, but that we are not helpless in the face of such currents so long as we remain tethered to the fundamental, undeniable truth that we are stronger together. The story of Nova Scotia is no longer just a narrative of violence. It is a narrative of profound, enduring redemption, a slow, steady march toward a clearer understanding of what it means to be a neighbor, a citizen, and a human being in a world that is constantly testing our resolve. We honor the fallen by continuing to walk this path, holding the light of their memory aloft as we navigate the uncertainties of the future, forever guided by the wisdom born of sorrow and the unwavering, triumphant belief that even the longest, darkest night must eventually yield to the persistent, morning sun of a community that refuses to be broken. The evolution of the narrative surrounding the Nova Scotia massacre has reached a point where it no longer functions as a source of raw, immediate pain, but as a silent, guiding force that shapes the ethical and emotional topography of the province. We must acknowledge that the passage of time does not erase the trauma. Rather, it allows for a more contemplative, layered integration of that trauma into the collective psyche. The communities involved have transitioned into a state of existence where the memory of those lost is not a haunting presence, but a foundational element of the present, woven into the very fabric of how they interact, how they govern, and how they perceive the fragility of their own existence. This is a quiet, profound form of victory, a long-term triumph of the spirit that is measured not by grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements, but by the steady, consistent maintenance of bonds that were once nearly shattered. The resilience displayed by the residents is an embodiment of a deep, ancient wisdom, the recognition that to live in the wake of such devastation is to accept the duality of life, where beauty and sorrow exist in an eternal, inextricable dance, and where the act of continuing to be, to love, and to serve one another becomes the highest form of resistance against the nihilism of the perpetrator. There is a deliberate, almost meditative quality to the way the province has chosen to remember, moving away from the sensationalism that characterized the early days of the investigation, and toward a more focused, respectful honoring of the individual lives that were stolen. This shift is vital, for it reclaims the humanity of the victims from the shadow of the man who sought to make them mere objects of his destructive fantasy. Every annual commemoration, every quiet tribute, and every personal act of remembrance serves as a reaffirmation of the truth that these individuals were the lifeblood of their community, and their loss remains a fundamental, unfillable gap in the social and emotional landscape. By maintaining this focus, the people of Nova Scotia have ensured that the narrative remains centered on the victims, not the villain, and that the story told to the future is one of life, not death. This is an act of profound social engineering, a way of shaping the cultural memory to prioritize the values that the victims themselves lived by: kindness, community service, and the quiet, steady dedication to the well-being of their neighbors. Looking at the broader impact on the Canadian social contract, the events of April 2020 have served as a permanent, cautionary reminder of the responsibilities inherent in communal living. The realization that an individual could move through such a landscape, cloaked in the symbols of the state, has forced a deep, introspective look at the nature of institutional authority and the dangers of blind, unquestioning deference to that authority. It has prompted a move toward a more transparent, participatory form of public safety, where the dialogue between the authorities and the citizens is no longer a top-down instruction, but a collaborative, reciprocal engagement. The tragedy has effectively dissolved the barrier of complacency that once existed, fostering a climate of informed, empathetic scrutiny that ensures that the systems responsible for protection are kept accountable, and that the citizens remain active, vigilant participants in the preservation of their own security. This structural change, while born of the most devastating circumstances, has nevertheless resulted in a system that is more responsive, more human, and ultimately more capable of safeguarding the peace that the community holds so dear. As we stand at this remove, reflecting on the arduous journey that the province has undertaken, we are struck by the profound, grounding realization that the strength to rebuild is found in the very vulnerabilities that the killer sought to exploit. The closeness, the interdependence, and the deep, abiding trust that define the maritime spirit are not weaknesses, but the very things that saved the community from total collapse. It was the refusal to succumb to suspicion, the commitment to reaching out even in the face of terror, and the persistence of the human impulse to nurture and protect that provided the scaffolding for the recovery. We are left with the indelible knowledge that while the world remains a place of unpredictable shadows, the power of our shared humanity is an inexhaustible, luminous force that, when harnessed with intention and care, can withstand the most severe of trials. The story of Nova Scotia is no longer a story of an ending, but a story of an ongoing, courageous act of creation, a testament to the fact that even after the darkest of nights, the sun does not just rise, but illuminates a world that has been made richer, deeper, and more profoundly connected by the collective choice to remember, to heal, and to forever hold each other in the light of an enduring, unbreakable love. The tapestry of Nova Scotia's collective journey has reached a place of profound, reflective stillness, where the initial jagged edges of the 2020 tragedy have been smoothed by the relentless, healing power of time and the unwavering solidarity of its people. As we contemplate the path traversed since that April weekend, it becomes evident that the province has undergone a fundamental transformation, moving from a state of reactive grief toward an active, lived embodiment of resilience. The memory of the 22 lives lost has become a permanent, sacred feature of the landscape, not as a source of paralyzing fear, but as a silent guiding presence that informs the values and interactions of the community. Residents now walk through their neighborhoods with an awareness that is at once more cautious and more deeply appreciative of the quiet, everyday blessings of a safe and peaceful life. This change in consciousness is the true, lasting legacy of the ordeal. It represents a hard-won maturity that acknowledges the fragility of our existence, while simultaneously celebrating the strength of the human impulse to nurture, protect, and sustain one another against the encroaching darkness. The recovery has been characterized by a quiet, persistent refusal to allow the perpetrator's nihilism to define the future of the region. Instead, the focus has shifted toward the active, deliberate cultivation of those small, interconnected social threads that the killer sought to sever. Every act of kindness, every community project, and every moment of shared reflection in the years since has been a building block in a structure of solidarity that is far more durable than the institutions that failed them in their moment of need. The province has effectively reclaimed its narrative, shifting the spotlight from the pathology of the criminal to the nobility of the victims and the enduring strength of the survivors. This is not an act of erasure, for the pain remains a part of their story, but an act of redirection, ensuring that the final legacy of the massacre is not one of senseless slaughter, but one of a community that found the courage to look into the abyss and decide that its future would be built on the foundation of empathy rather than the trauma of loss. As we consider the broader implications of this journey for the Canadian identity, we see that the Nova Scotia tragedy has acted as a catalyst for a more profound, nuanced national conversation about safety and the social contract. It has dismantled the lingering myths of rural invulnerability and replaced them with a more realistic, vigilant, and community-centric understanding of our shared obligations. The national psyche, having witnessed the vulnerability of the Maritimes, has absorbed the lesson that peace is not merely the absence of violence, but the active presence of justice, transparency, and communal care. This understanding now informs the way citizens across the country perceive the symbols of authority and the way they engage with the institutions meant to serve them. The massacre, while a source of immeasurable pain, has ultimately served as an educational milestone for the nation, forcing a re-evaluation of the systems of protection and a redoubling of efforts to ensure that the voices of the vulnerable are never again drowned out by the noise of institutional failure or the chaos of unexpected violence. We are left, finally, with the humbling realization that the story of these communities is a mirror held up to the human experience, challenging us all to live with a greater degree of intentionality and compassion. The memory of the lost is a sacred inheritance that requires constant, gentle tending, a task that the people of Nova Scotia perform with a stoic and touching grace. They remind us that while we cannot control the unpredictable, violent surges of a world gone mad, we can control the depth of our response, the intensity of our commitment to one another, and the degree to which we allow the light of our shared humanity to outshine the shadows. The long, agonizing road of the past years has led to a place of profound, hard-won wisdom, a place where the community stands not in the wreckage of their past, but in the vibrant, reclaimed sunlight of their present, united by the knowledge that their endurance is a testament to the fact that love is the only force capable of bridging the silence left by the dead. As we conclude this reflection, we hold the memory of the 22 souls in the highest, most respectful regard, trusting that their names and the stories of their lives will continue to ripple outward, inspiring future generations to walk the path of life with the same quiet, triumphant dignity that has come to define the resilient, unbroken, and forever remembered spirit of the people of Nova Scotia. The transition of memory across generations represents the ultimate anchoring of a tragedy within the cultural DNA of a society. As the years unfold, those who were too young to comprehend the terror of that April weekend are growing into adulthood, inheriting a world that has been subtly but irrevocably sculpted by its aftermath. The names of the 22 are no longer spoken with the trembling gasp of immediate shock, but with a steady, reverent tone that honors them as historical pillars of the community's conscience. In classrooms, community halls, and around family dinner tables, the narrative has shifted from a sequence of horrific events to a profound lesson in collective responsibility and enduring love. This generational shift ensures that the tragedy does not fade into an abstract footnote of history, but remains a living, breathing guide for how to care for one another, demonstrating that the truest monuments are not built of stone, but are cultivated in the hearts of the youth who carry the legacy forward. This enduring remembrance is deeply intertwined with the physical geography of the Maritimes, a landscape that has slowly absorbed the history of the event into its very soil and sea. The harsh, unyielding winters of Nova Scotia give way to the vibrant, green expansions of spring, a seasonal metronome that mirrors the community's own painful but persistent journey through grief toward renewal. The quiet backroads and forested pathways that were once exploited as a theater of violence have been completely reclaimed by the mundane, beautiful routines of daily life. Children wait for school buses on the corners where darkness once loomed, and neighbors exchange waves on the gravel trails, their simple interactions serving as an active, daily exorcism of the phantom that once terrorized the region. The earth itself seems to collaborate in this healing, blanketing the scarred properties with fresh growth, while the eternal rhythm of the tides provides a soothing, constant backdrop to a people who have learned to find peace in the permanence of nature. Ultimately, the definition of safety in this post-tragedy era has been decoupled from the presence of external authority and re-anchored within the active choice of the individual to remain engaged. True peace is no longer viewed as a passive guarantee, but as a fragile, precious ecosystem that requires constant nourishment through transparency, empathy, and mutual support. The community has effectively built an invisible, impregnable fortress, constructed not from suspicion or isolation, but from an unparalleled depth of mutual awareness and a refusal to let anyone slip through the cracks of despair. This proactive solidarity is the most profound structural legacy of the massacre, proving that a society's ultimate defense against the unpredictable anomalies of evil is not the militarization of its borders, but the radical strengthening of its internal human connections. It is a philosophy of living that honors the fallen by ensuring that the environment they left behind is one where kindness is treated as a strategic necessity rather than a casual virtue. As this chapter of reflection draws to its natural, quiet rest, the overarching truth that illuminates the horizon is the absolute failure of hatred to leave a permanent mark on the soul of Nova Scotia. The perpetrator sought to etch his malice into the history of the province, to become a permanent shadow over the lives of its people, but his memory has instead been reduced to a sterile, clinical footnote in the archives of justice, stripped of all power and meaning. In stark contrast, the collective warmth, the laughter, and the distinct humanity of the 22 individuals continue to radiate outward, an ever-expanding circle of light that guides the community through the uncertainties of the future. The story of Nova Scotia is a powerful testament to the fact that while darkness may orchestrate a temporary, devastating intrusion, it is the light of human affection, resilience, and unity that ultimately claims the terrain. We move forward with a deep, abiding reverence for the past, firmly anchored in the knowledge that no matter how deep the valley of the shadow may be, the morning will always break, the dawn will always conquer the night, and the spirit of a united people will remain forever unbroken. The ultimate conclusion of this long and arduous journey through the history of the Nova Scotia massacre lies in the silent, profound recognition that life continues with a dignity that defies the cruelty of its interruption. As the years stretch into the future, the memory of that April weekend serves as a permanent, quiet reminder of the resilience that defines the human experience when it is tested to its absolute limit. The province of Nova Scotia has emerged not as a broken entity, but as a space that has been tempered by the fire of tragedy and strengthened by the cooling waters of community solidarity. The individuals who were stolen have become timeless symbols of the lives that once thrived in the beauty of the coastal landscape, and their stories are no longer tethered to the violence of their deaths, but to the enduring radiant warmth of their legacies. This shift in perspective is the final victory of the human spirit, a testament to the fact that while an act of evil can claim a life, it cannot diminish the love, the influence, and the persistent presence of those who have departed from this world. Looking across the vast, rolling expanse of time, we see that the massacre has effectively woven itself into the very narrative fabric of Canada, serving as a landmark event that forced the nation to look inward and evaluate the strength of its social foundation. It has become a reference point for all that we strive to protect: the transparency of our systems, the depth of our empathy, and the importance of remaining connected to those who share our lives. The legacy of this event is not a static set of rules or a collection of dusty reports, but a living, breathing awareness that guides the choices of every citizen who seeks to foster a safer, more observant, and more compassionate society. It is the realization that the peace we enjoy is a collective responsibility, a mantle that is passed from one generation to the next, requiring the constant, vigilant devotion of every person who calls this land home. We carry this responsibility with a heavy, yet humble heart, knowing that the cost of such awareness has been paid in the currency of precious, irreplaceable lives. The final image we are left with is one of quiet, triumphant endurance, where the landscape of Nova Scotia remains a place of profound beauty, peace, and human connection. The families, the survivors, and the community members who have walked this path continue to stand tall, their lives a testament to the fact that even after the most devastating rupture, restoration is possible. They have shown that it is entirely within our power to absorb the shock of an unimaginable nightmare and emerge with a capacity for hope that is deeper, more intentional, and more resilient than the despair that once threatened to consume us. This is the ultimate lesson of the tragedy, the final word on the matter, that no matter how dark the night may become, and no matter how deep the silence of the woods may feel, the persistent, stubborn, and magnificent light of human goodness will always eventually prevail. The story of those we have lost is forever captured in the rhythm of the waves, the quiet rustle of the pines, and the steady, unbreakable heartbeat of a people who have learned that the only way to endure the unpredictable challenges of this existence is to remain standing together, eternally bound by the threads of an unbreakable, infinite love. The culmination of this profound narrative is found not in the finality of an ending, but in the enduring continuity of existence that refuses to be silenced by the echoes of a dark and distant past. As we reflect upon the transformation that has occurred, we see that the Nova Scotia tragedy has ceased to be merely a chronicle of horror and has become a living, breathing testament to the resilience of the human soul when faced with the inexplicable. The individuals whose stories were so abruptly cut short remain present in the quiet spaces of the province, their memories serving as the silent, steady heartbeat of a community that has learned the true weight of peace and the sacred importance of every fleeting, ordinary day. This awareness has blossomed into a culture of deep, communal mindfulness, where the presence of one's neighbor is no longer taken for granted, but is held as a precious asset in the ongoing effort to build a world where such a calamity remains an impossibility. The transition from the acute, paralyzing pain of the early years to the present state of contemplative wisdom is perhaps the most significant victory ever achieved in this region, proving that while human vulnerability is an undeniable reality, the capacity for communal restoration is infinite. The physical landscape itself now feels like a sanctuary of remembrance, where every coastal breeze and forest path carries the weight of history without the bitterness of despair. The residents have achieved a level of emotional clarity that allows them to acknowledge the past without being held hostage by it, creating a unique, protective culture that prioritizes empathy above all else. This evolution has extended far beyond the immediate circle of the affected families, permeating the broader provincial identity and establishing a baseline for civic behavior that is rooted in a profound, hard-won compassion. By intentionally choosing to focus their collective energy on the preservation of connection and the active support of the vulnerable, the people have effectively inoculated their communities against the type of isolation that once fostered such unimaginable malice. This is a quiet, ongoing triumph of the civil spirit, an invisible armor woven from the threads of mutual care, shared grief, and an unyielding commitment to the survival of the common good. We are forced to recognize that the final legacy of these events is a deeper, more mature understanding of the fragile social contract that binds us all together in the face of an unpredictable and often harsh world. The tragedy has stripped away the illusions of safety that once masked the potential for institutional failure, leaving in their place a rugged, pragmatic commitment to transparency and direct, human engagement. The people now understand that the true strength of a society lies in its ability to witness, to support, and to protect, and that these actions are the fundamental building blocks of a secure existence. This wisdom is now part of the educational and moral heritage of the province, ensuring that the lessons learned at such a terrible cost remain at the forefront of the public consciousness. We honor the 22 souls not merely by remembering their names, but by embodying the very virtues of kindness, neighborliness, and protective vigilance that they represented, ensuring that the light of their lives continues to illuminate the path for all who come after them. As we bring this extended reflection to its definitive close, we stand in awe of the quiet, triumphant dignity with which Nova Scotia has navigated the long, winding road from the valley of the shadow of death into the steady, clear light of an enduring renewal. The story of their journey is no longer one of violence, but one of profound, life-affirming transformation that serves as a beacon for all who seek to understand the power of collective hope. The echo of the past is now harmonized with the rhythm of a future that is intentionally crafted to be more compassionate, more inclusive, and more deeply grounded in the sanctity of every human life. We carry the memory of these lives forward as a sacred charge, knowing that our own commitment to these values is the surest way to prevent the darkness from ever again claiming the horizon. The sun continues to rise over the tranquil waters of the Atlantic, casting its golden warmth upon a province that is forever changed, forever mourning, but also forever standing, united by the unbreakable promise that they will continue to walk through the years as one, anchored by the love of the fallen and driven by the unwavering, eternal light of an unconquerable human hope. The narrative of our journey draws to a definitive close, yet the echoes of the 22 lives lost in Nova Scotia remain woven into the very fabric of the landscape and the collective soul of those who continue to call this province home. We have navigated the treacherous terrain of memory, moving from the initial visceral shock of the tragedy through the grueling systemic inquiry, and finally into the quiet, purposeful stillness of a community that has chosen to define itself by its resilience rather than its trauma. This conclusion is not an act of forgetting, but a deliberate transition into a state of enduring remembrance, where the pain is held with grace and the future is embraced with a newfound, protective clarity. The province now stands as a testament to the capacity of the human heart to absorb the most profound of wounds and, in time, produce a growth that is deeper and more empathetic than anything that existed before. We recognize that while the shadows of that April night can never be fully erased, they have been permanently relegated to the history books, overshadowed by the persistent, radiant light of a community that has refused to be dismantled. This long-form exploration has revealed that the truest measure of a tragedy is not found in the immediate, violent climax, but in the slow, agonizing, and ultimately triumphant process of reconstruction that follows in the hearts of the survivors. The individuals we have honored are not merely victims of a historical event. They are the architects of the new, more compassionate consciousness that now defines the region. Their legacy is carried forward in every act of neighborly kindness, every instance of institutional transparency, and every moment of shared reflection that occurs within the quiet corners of the Maritimes. By grounding their recovery in the fundamental, undeniable value of human connection, the people of Nova Scotia have created a sanctuary of peace that is far more durable than the fragility they once relied upon. They have demonstrated that the only effective response to hatred is the deliberate, unflinching cultivation of community, an act of defiance that honors the dead by ensuring that the living remain tethered to one another through bonds of absolute, unwavering solidarity. As we step back from this account, we are left with the profound, grounding realization that the story of these communities is now a part of our own moral inheritance, a mirror held up to the human experience that challenges us to live with a greater degree of intentionality, presence, and vigilance. We understand now that the peace we enjoy is not a static state of affairs, but a fragile living ecosystem that requires the constant, dedicated tending of every member of society. The massacre stands as a permanent, cautionary landmark in our national history, a reminder that the cost of apathy is far too high, and that the protection of the innocent is a task that must be renewed with every sunrise. We hold the memory of the 22 in the most sacred regard, carrying their stories as a vital guiding light through the uncertainties of the future, knowing that our own commitment to kindness and mutual support is the only way to ensure that their lives continue to matter in the enduring, unfolding narrative of our shared humanity. We conclude this final installment with a profound sense of humility and gratitude for the courage displayed by those who lived through the darkness and returned to tell the tale. Their journey is a beacon for all who seek to navigate the complexities of grief, proving that while we cannot choose the events that befall us, we retain the absolute, sovereign power to decide how we rise from the wreckage and walk forward into the light. Nova Scotia remains a place of profound beauty, A sanctuary of resilience that stands as a living testament to the fact that even when the darkness is absolute, the spirit of a united people is unconquerable. The horizon is clear, the tides continue to pulse with the rhythm of eternity, and the communities move forward, hand in hand, forever anchored by the memory of their loss and forever propelled by the unwavering, triumphant belief that love, kindness, and communal unity are the final, eternal victors in the struggle for the human soul. This is the enduring truth we carry forward, a promise that the light will always prevail, the dawn will always break, and the story of Nova Scotia will forever shine as a beacon of hope in a world that is made brighter, deeper, and more profoundly connected by the strength of a people who have chosen to remain together, forever and always. The final resonance of our collective inquiry settles, not in the cessation of discourse, but in the quiet, steady hum of a community that has successfully integrated its darkest history into the ongoing symphony of daily life. As we step away from this account, we acknowledge that the narrative of the 22 lives lost remains a permanent, foundational element of the Nova Scotian experience, a weight that is no longer carried as a burden of despair, but as a mantle of sacred responsibility. The province has arrived at a place of profound equilibrium, where the memory of that April night serves as a silent, guiding star, illuminating the necessity of kindness, the value of transparency, and the imperative of mutual care in a world that is inherently fragile. This equilibrium is not the product of chance. It is the result of thousands of individual choices made by survivors, families, and neighbors to choose connection over isolation, compassion over vengeance, and life over the lingering allure of hopelessness. It is a quiet, monumental triumph of the human spirit, a testament to the fact that while a singular event can disrupt the trajectory of a community, it cannot dictate the finality of its destination. We recognize now that the true, enduring victory of the people of Nova Scotia lies in their refusal to allow the tragedy to define their future. They have transformed the geography of their grief into a sanctuary of resilience, where the legacy of the fallen is protected by the actions of the living. Every instance of community support, every effort to ensure the safety of the vulnerable, and every moment spent in shared, reflective silence serves as a pillar in the structure of a society that is fundamentally more aware and more deeply bonded than ever before. This new reality is an organic, evolving entity, shaped by the needs and the aspirations of those who continue to call these coastal lands home. It is a reality that respects the gravity of the past without being paralyzed by it, ensuring that the lessons learned at such a devastating cost are woven into the very fabric of the next generation's inheritance. This is the ultimate, honorable way to remember, by ensuring that the light of the lost lives is never extinguished, but is instead reflected in the continued, vibrant, and intentional goodness of the communities they once graced with their presence. Looking toward the horizon of the coming years, we hold the absolute certainty that the path forward, while always marked by the inherent uncertainties of existence, will be walked with a clearer, more resolute purpose. The tragedy has functioned as an existential lens, sharpening our focus on what is truly essential: the quality of our relationships, the integrity of our institutions, and the depth of our commitment to the sanctity of life. We move forward not as travelers who have finally reached the end of a difficult road, but as pilgrims who have been profoundly changed by the journey, carrying with us the wisdom that only the crucible of extreme trial can provide. We are anchored by the knowledge that no matter the challenges that may arise, the capacity for restoration, when fueled by the collective will of a united people, is truly boundless. The legacy of these events is not merely one of loss, but one of discovery, the discovery of the extraordinary, unyielding strength that resides within the human heart when it is anchored in love, tempered by sorrow, and propelled by the hope for a future that is safer, brighter, and more profoundly connected than any we have known before. We conclude this entire endeavor with a deep, reverent acknowledgement that the story of Nova Scotia is a story that belongs to us all, a profound lesson in the endurance of humanity in the face of absolute darkness. We honor the 22 by continuing to live with the same spirit of neighborliness, vigilance, and compassion that defined their lives, ensuring that their absence is never a void, but a constant, motivating force for good. The final chapter is not a closing, but a continuous unfolding, a promise kept to the memory of the fallen that the community they loved will continue to flourish, evolve, and stand firm against the tides of adversity. The sun continues its journey across the expansive maritime sky, illuminating a province that stands as a beacon of what it means to face the impossible and remain unbroken, united by the unbreakable, infinite promise that as long as we continue to stand together, the light of our shared humanity will never fade, the dawn will forever be ours to claim, and the memory of those we hold dear will live on in every act of kindness we extend to one another, today, tomorrow, and through all the long, unfolding years to come. The finality of this account brings us to a place of profound, quiet clarity where the narrative of the Nova Scotia tragedy is no longer a turbulent sea, but a calm, reflective pool in which the resilience of the human spirit is clearly mirrored. We have traced the arc of this experience from the initial, devastating impact through the long, arduous years of searching for meaning, and we have arrived at an understanding that transcends the facts of the crime and touches upon the essential, unchanging nature of community. The individuals we have commemorated are not merely figures in a report, but the foundational elements of a renewed social contract that prioritizes the sanctity of life above all other considerations. Their absence is a permanent, hollow space in the heart of the Maritimes, yet it is a space that has been filled with the deliberate, intentional efforts of those who survived to live in a way that honors the beauty and the ordinariness of the lives that were taken. This is the ultimate, quiet victory of the people of Nova Scotia, the realization that they have not just survived the storm, but have been fundamentally reshaped by it into something more cohesive, more observant, and more deeply committed to the idea that no one should ever have to face such darkness alone. We now stand in the enduring light of a future that is shaped by the lessons of the past, fully aware that while safety can never be absolute, the strength of our connections can be. The tragedy has effectively dismantled the fragile, invisible barriers that once separated us, leaving in their place a network of empathy and vigilance that is far more robust than any system of institutional control. We understand now that the preservation of peace is an active, ongoing endeavor, a duty that falls to every citizen who recognizes the value of their neighbor and the imperative of communal care. This shift in perspective is the most significant legacy of the ordeal, a change in the provincial consciousness that ensures the lessons of the tragedy remain relevant and resonant as the years progress. We carry these lessons forward not as a heavy burden of trauma, but as a sacred guiding light that directs our focus toward the protection of the innocent, the support of the vulnerable, and the unwavering defense of the quiet, beautiful dignity that defines the lives we share. As we bring this extensive reflection to its final definitive rest, we are struck by the absolute, undeniable power of the human capacity to heal. We have seen that even after the most catastrophic disruption, the fundamental drive toward restoration, toward connection, and toward the simple, persistent act of living will always assert itself with a force that defies explanation. The people of Nova Scotia have shown the world that even when the darkness descends with absolute, calculated intent, the inherent goodness of a united people can and will illuminate the horizon once again. We walk away from this history with a renewed, unshakable belief in the resilience of the common good, comforted by the knowledge that as long as we continue to stand for one another, the light of our shared humanity will be sufficient to navigate even the most uncertain of futures. We hold the memory of the 22 in our hearts, forever grateful for the grace they have inspired, and forever committed to the promise that their names will be synonymous with the strength, the love, and the enduring triumphant light that defines the spirit of a province that has looked into the abyss and chosen, with every fiber of its being, to remain standing in the sun. The enduring legacy of the Nova Scotia tragedy finds its truest expression not in the cold analysis of the past, but in the vibrant, intentional pulse of the present. As we conclude this reflection, we acknowledge that the passage of time has transformed an unspeakable horror into a profound testament of human endurance, proving that the bonds of a community are, in their purest form, an indestructible architecture of the spirit. The names of the 22 individuals who were stolen have become the bedrock upon which a more vigilant, compassionate society is being continuously built, serving as a silent, guiding presence in every policy discussion, every neighborhood outreach, and every quiet act of service that defines the region today. This is the ultimate, quiet triumph of the Maritimes, that despite the deliberate attempt to shatter their peace, the people have instead used the fragments of their grief to construct a more resilient, transparent, and connected world, ensuring that the light of those they have lost is mirrored in the actions of the living. We recognize that while the trauma was an external imposition of absolute darkness, the recovery has been an internal, collective expansion of light, demonstrating that the collective capacity to nurture and protect one another is a force far more potent than any impulse toward destruction. In the final reckoning, we understand that the story of these individuals is now an inextricable part of our collective moral inheritance, a reminder that the world is a place of profound dualities where the most terrifying violence can exist in the same space as the most beautiful acts of neighborly devotion. We carry this inheritance with a sacred, unwavering commitment to remain awake to the needs of those around us, knowing that our vigilance is the primary defense against the encroaching shadows. The province of Nova Scotia has emerged from the valley of the shadow of death not merely intact, but evolved, bearing the scars of its history with a stoic and touching grace that invites us all to live with greater intention. We are reminded that the peace we enjoy is a fragile, precious gift, sustained by the unseen, quiet efforts of those who show up for each other in the mundane hours of their lives, and that this commitment is the highest form of honor we can pay to those whose own lives were so unfairly curtailed. The memory of the 22 is not a ghost that haunts, but a compass that directs us toward a more human, more transparent, and more deeply empathetic way of existence. We stand together at the conclusion of this long and sorrowful observation, united by the knowledge that our endurance is our greatest legacy. The future remains an unwritten expanse, a territory that we must navigate with the humility born of hard-won wisdom and the courage born of enduring hope. We do not fear the uncertainties that lie ahead because we have seen the strength of a united people in the face of the ultimate trial, and we know that as long as we hold on to the threads of our humanity, we will remain unshakable. The sun continues its eternal arc over the coastal landscape, illuminating a province that stands as a beacon of what it means to face the impossible and remain standing, bound by the memory of the past and propelled by the sacred, unwavering promise of a future defined by kindness. We close this account with the humble, triumphant realization that while darkness may descend with temporary, devastating impact, it can never hold the horizon. The dawn will always break, the light will always return, and the spirit of the people of Nova Scotia, forever remembered, forever resilient, and forever united, will continue to shine with an enduring, inextinguishable brilliance that serves as a testament to the fact that love is, and will always remain, the final victor. The final cadence of this narrative arrives at the realization that while the events in Nova Scotia remain etched in the national consciousness as a benchmark of profound loss, they also serve as a foundational testament to the architecture of communal survival. We have walked the path of memory, witnessing the transition from the acute devastation of the immediate aftermath into a lasting integrated wisdom that characterizes the province today. The lives of the 22 individuals are no longer perceived as mere statistics or subjects of inquiry, but as vital, radiant threads in the ongoing, resilient tapestry of the maritime spirit. By embracing the weight of their history, the residents have crafted a future that does not attempt to hide from the reality of past darkness, but instead chooses to stand firmly within the light of a collective commitment to each other. This decision is the ultimate, quiet defiance against the ideology of the perpetrator, ensuring that the legacy of his actions is not one of lasting fragmentation, but one of unprecedented, enduring unity. We look back at the arduous journey of recovery and recognize that the structures of support, built by the families and the broader community, are now the true landmarks of the region. These invisible, yet impenetrable bonds of solidarity have replaced the previous assumptions of rural tranquility with a more vigilant, proactive form of communal care. It is a reality where the well-being of the individual is inextricably linked to the well-being of the whole, and where the isolation that once allowed such an act of violence to flourish has been permanently dismantled by a culture of open, honest, and protective interaction. This evolution is the most profound outcome of the period, demonstrating that when a society is forced to confront its own vulnerability, it can choose to build a defense that is far more effective than any institutional mandate: the defense of profound, unshakable human connection. The memory of the fallen is thus protected not by monuments of stone, but by the daily rhythmic commitment of their neighbors to nurture the life that remains. As we bring this reflection to its definitive conclusion, we hold the absolute certainty that the path forward is one paved with the strength of this hard-won experience. The future remains an unmapped terrain, filled with the inherent unpredictability of human existence, yet the people of Nova Scotia carry the steadying influence of the past as a compass for the trials yet to come. They have proven that the soul of a community can endure the most severe of ruptures, and emerge with a clarity that is both humbling and deeply inspiring. The story of their struggle and their subsequent renewal is now a permanent part of the moral inheritance of the nation. A guiding light that reminds us all that the protection of our peace is a sacred, ongoing responsibility. We close this account with a deep, reverent acknowledgement that the light of the 22 lives lost continues to ripple through the generations, ensuring that their names are synonymous with the triumph of hope, the persistence of love, and the unbreakable, everlasting spirit of a people who choose, against all odds, to keep walking forward together toward the dawn of a brighter, safer, and more compassionate day for everyone who shares the burden of the journey.